Chapter 293. The saber was just a very ordinary saber. The only thing that was surprising was that this saber was condensed from the Dharma form. Bai Hong originally thought that this mysterious man was also a sword cultivator, but he didn't expect that he would suddenly conjure a saber. Left hand holding a saber, right hand holding a sword. Because of the difference in level, Bai Hong had always been unable to accurately detect the fluctuation of spirit energy on Chen Shi's body. Until the appearance of this saber, Bai Hong finally noticed that there was a strong fluctuation of spirit energy on Chen Shi's body. Just the movement of spirit chi before charging up for a move gave Bai Hong a very strange feeling all of a sudden. Like a lonely traveler who came to the end of the world, looking at the sea and the starry sky. And Chen Shi was the sea, the starry sky. As vast as the sea, as deep as the starry sky. The moment the long saber appeared in Chen Shi's hand, the calm sea suddenly blew up like a typhoon. The spirit energy between heaven and earth seemed to be guided, and rushed towards Chen Shi's position. In an instant, surging, raging. Seeing this, Bai Hong couldn't help but change color, and hurriedly used the long sword in his hand to draw a sword flower, trying to calm himself down. This mysterious man had already promised him that as long as he could withstand this move, he would let the three of them live. Thinking about it, with the other party's strength, it should be impossible for him to go back on his word. Therefore, Bai Hong immediately braced himself and waited, gathering all the vital essence in his body into his dantian, preparing to use his trump card to receive the other party's earth-shattering move. Although his strength was definitely not as good as the other party, Bai Hong still felt that it was impossible, that he couldn't even withstand one move from the other party, right? Thinking of this, Bai Hong couldn't help but look at the long sword in his hand, and a trace of bitterness appeared on his face. The blade was still shiny and sharp, but Bai Hong didn't notice it. In his heart, he no longer had the indomitable momentum of a sword cultivator. Because he was afraid. Fear before the battle, this was a big taboo. And just as Bai Hong was feeling uneasy, Chen Shi's voice suddenly sounded. "Your heart is in a mess, do you want to have some time to adjust?" Hearing this, Bai Hong could not help but be stunned. After taking a deep look at Chen Shi, Bai Hong shook her head and said to Chen Shi seriously, "No need, thank you for your advice." After saying that, Bai Hong gently exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. Then, under Chen Shi's slightly surprised gaze, she fiercely slashed her left hand on the sword. Blood immediately dyed the long sword red. However, the white rainbow seemed to be unaware of it. She raised her sword horizontally and recited word by word to Chen Shi. This move is called sun piercing. It is derived from the meaning of the white rainbow piercing the sun. There is only one move, please enlighten me. The comet attacks the moon, and the white rainbow pierces the sun. Anger has yet to be unleashed, but a truce has fallen from the heavens. If the warrior is enraged, 2 corpses will fall. 5 steps of blood, the world is in mourning. An extremely powerful aura suddenly erupted from Bai Hong's body. Even when facing Chen Shi, who was wielding both sword and saber, she was not at a disadvantage at all. Seeing this, Chen Shi could not help but nod in satisfaction. One must know that when Changli had faced the sword and saber dual mastery, his performance was not even as good as Bai Hong's today. The more intelligent a person was, the more afraid they were of death. However, Bai Hong was able to withstand this kind of pressure. She even managed to break through herself and forcibly bring out her peak state. Just based on this point alone, 10 Changlis could not compare to her. Chen Shi knew that cultivation was not easy, so he had always cherished talents. But regrettably, in order to give Nian Yin and Ying Ying a stable environment, he had no choice but to keep Bai Hong and her party here today. He could not let them return to the divine gate. "Come, as long as you can withstand this move of mine, I will let you go." After taking a deep look at Bai Hong, Chen Shi finally raised the sword and saber in his hand. This was also the most powerful set of techniques that he had learned in his life, sword and saber. The second move. Sword splitting light, sword vanishing shadow, desolate killing, chaotic mortal world. As soon as the chaotic mortal world was released, Chen Shi suddenly opened his arms and let the sword and saber in his hand fly out, circling in the air. Using chi to control the sword, using spirit to control the sword. The sword and saber flew faster and faster, leaving behind afterimages in the air. It was as if there were countless swords and sabers in the sky. At this time, Bai Hong felt that there seemed to be an incomparably sorrowful and desolate aura between heaven and earth. If he closed his eyes and carefully felt it, it would give him the illusion that he was on a battlefield. A vast battlefield after a great battle. There was no living person, only endless desolation, and the heavy coldness that death brought. This move could actually affect the minds of others? Thinking of this, Bai Hong could not help but shiver. However, he did not retreat at all. Instead, he gripped the sword in his hand tightly and suddenly turned into a ray of white light, charging straight at Qin Shi. There were no fancy moves. One man and one sword was enough. Even if there were thousands of people, he would still go. This was the white rainbow piercing the sun. The moment Bai Hong rushed out with the sword, Qin Shi seemed to have noticed something, so he fiercely clasped his hands in front of his chest. The thousands of swords dancing in the sky seemed to have received some kind of instruction. They suddenly gathered in front of him and then spiraled into a sphere. The sphere carried a desolate and desperate aura, like the broken swords and sabers on the battlefield. Even if they were broken, they would still shatter everything in the world. The sphere formed by the sword and saber collided head-on with the ray of white light. The moment the two collided, the whole scene seemed to be frozen. Immediately after, an extremely violent explosion occurred. Boom! With the point of collision as the center, invisible energy waves continued to spread outwards wildly. In an instant, the wind and clouds surged and the sea waves surged. Like an atomic bomb exploding, the huge explosion made the sea water soar into the sky. Looking at the center of the explosion, one could see the colorful seaweed on the seabed. Even the sea was blown up. The power of one blow was so terrifying. Tons of sea water were blown into the air, and then turned into a torrent, pouring down from the sky. The crashing sound of the waves lasted for a full 5 minutes, and the vast Pacific Ocean finally returned to its previous state. Although the sea was calm, Qin Shi's heart did not calm down for a long time. He floated in the sky, and the sword and saber in his hand had already dissipated. Sigh. After letting out a soft sigh, Qin Shi raised his head and looked forward. Bai Hong was not far away. But his white cloak had already become rags and it was stained with blood. Like a rag doll that had just been fished out of a red vat, blood kept coming out of Bai Hong's body, and then slid down his skin to the soles of his feet, and finally dripped into the sea drop by drop. Who would have thought that the bloody man in front of him, who looked like he had been executed by 1,000 cuts, was actually Bai Hong, who was said to be as beautiful as jade, as unparalleled in the world? Sir, good skill, Bai Hong, I've learned. Bai Hong opened his mouth with great difficulty. After saying these words in a voice as soft as a mosquito, he seemed to have lost all strength and fell limply from the sky. Splash! Scarlet blood dyed the sea red. Qin Shi lowered his head and looked at the bubbles mixed with blood coming out of the sea. He could not help but let out a soft sigh again. Chapter 294. Tonight was destined to be a sleepless night. The strong light was still suspended in mid-air, like the sun constantly emitting dazzling rays of light, trying to illuminate everything around it. Qin Shi sat cross-legged in the air, only 2 to 3 meters above the sea surface, looking thoughtfully at the two spoils of war in his hands. One was Bai Hong's long sword, the other was naturally Qinghuan's long spear. The sword was named Flowing Cloud, and the spear was named Pointing Stars. The quality of the two weapons was not bad. Even in Qin Shi's eyes, they could barely be regarded as two offensive magic weapons. The so-called magic weapons were naturally treasures used by immortal cultivators, and usually had some kind of magical effect. For example, the azure wave silk gauze in Shui Xiang's hands, although it looked like a simple shawl, it had both offensive and defensive functions. When Shui Xiang was sneak attacked by Qin Shi, this long silk immediately turned into a defensive tool, protecting the seriously injured Shui Xiang, which also gave her another means of self-protection. Magic weapons were also divided into grades according to their quality. They were divided by immortal cultivators into magic weapons, spirit treasures, supreme treasures, and the extremely rare innate supreme treasures. Most magic weapons were refined by immortal cultivators themselves, just like forging swords. The craftsmanship of the craftsman and the materials used to forge the sword would affect the quality of the finished product. One had to know that the cultivation environment on Earth was so bad, it was naturally impossible to produce any high-quality magic weapon materials. Even the cleverest housewife couldn't cook without rice, without even the materials. Qin Shi couldn't make magic weapons out of thin air, right? Therefore he could at most refine some simple magic weapons. Just like the pendant that he gave to Aunt Zhang before, it could help her block some dangers such as car accidents, flower pots falling from the sky, and other unlucky things. But if Aunt Zhang encountered a bomb attack, the power of the explosion exceeded the pendant's tolerance limit, and the pendant would naturally lose its effect. Therefore these two spoils of war were actually very valuable in Qin Shi's eyes. As long as they were broken down and recast, He could use these materials to create a suitable defensive magic weapon for Nian. Although with Wuxia's public security, it was impossible for a terrorist incident like a bomb attack to happen. But it was better to be safe than sorry. Nian was his treasure. If she was accidentally hurt, Qin Shi would never forgive himself. Therefore, Qin Shi weighed the spoils in his hand and kept thinking about what kind of magic weapon he should forge for the little guy. Longevity lock? He was a child after all, so it was naturally best for him to wear a longevity lock. However, children nowadays matured early, especially girls. After a few years, would Nian find the longevity lock ugly and refuse to wear it anymore? Qin Shi was a little conflicted. He was afraid that Nian would not like it and throw it away. Why not make a jade bracelet? Or bracelets, anklets, and other accessories? As a father, he was constantly conflicted about how to please his daughter. But right at that moment, suddenly, an extremely strong fluctuation of spirit chi appeared in the strong light above his head. Qin Shi sensed something was wrong, so he quickly looked up. After looking at it for a while, he suddenly frowned. Something was wrong. Since this strong light was the so-called heavenly gate, then the current situation was somewhat like, he was watching television at home when a faint noise suddenly came from outside the door. Although the noise was small, it was enough to attract his attention. Therefore, Qin Shi immediately closed his eyes and carefully sensed for a while before finally confirming, there was someone behind the door. That person kept pacing back and forth outside the door as if he wanted to cross the door very much, but for some reason he was hesitating. It felt like a thief was checking if there was anyone in the house. Qin Shi did not want to expose himself, so he immediately restrained his aura and silently looked up at the strong light. At the same time, he held Bai Hong's flowing cloud sword tightly in his hand. The heavenly gate was a magical existence similar to a teleportation array. The inside and outside of the gate were connected to two completely different worlds. Although that person was outside the door, he could still affect the fluctuation of spirit chi inside the gate. What kind of terrifying cultivation was this? Relying on the fluctuation of spirit chi, Qin Shi secretly tried to figure out the other party's cultivation level. And the person outside the door seemed to be worried about something, so after pacing back and forth for a long time, he still did not cross the door. Qin Shi waited patiently. About 5 minutes later, a sudden change occurred. The strong light suddenly burst into a burst of extremely dazzling light. Qin Shi's expression turned cold. He immediately raised the long sword in his hand, ready to make the first move and catch the other party off guard. But at this time, the strong light suddenly flashed a few times, and then disappeared in an instant as if there was a power outage. Without a light source, the world suddenly darkened. Thick dark clouds covered the moonlight, to the extent that one could not see his fingers in front of him. Even Qin Shi could not see his surroundings clearly. Qin Shi lit up a ball of light. Under his control, the ball of light slowly flew to the place where the strong light was before. But there was nothing left. Even the spirit chi that had been crazily rushing to the place where the strong light was now like a water ball that had been pierced. The spirit chi of heaven and earth that had lost its restraints suddenly dissipated in all directions crazily. In just a few breaths of time, everything had returned to normal. As if nothing had happened. Only the sound of the waves was left between heaven and earth. Whoosh, whoosh, the waves slowly surged into the distance, one after another. Qin Shi let out a long sigh of relief, finally letting go of his worries. With the closing of the divine gate, this matter could be considered to have come to an end for the time being. Now he only needed to clean up the mess and erase the traces that he had left behind. Then, even if the divine gate appeared again in the future, it would have nothing to do with him. Qin Shi stood up and looked around. After confirming that there were no problems here, he was ready to leave. But at this time, he seemed to have noticed something and hurriedly looked up at the sky in the distance. Because the strong light disappeared, Qin Shi couldn't see very clearly. It wasn't until a black shadow rushed out of the clouds that Qin Shi finally saw the thing clearly with the light emitted by the ball of light. It was actually the trump card of the United States, the B-2 stealth bomber. The B-2 was known as the world's most advanced strategic bomber, with a cost of up to $2.4 billion. According to the United States Department of Defense, every time the B-2 was deployed, it would cost at least $3 million. Therefore, the moment he saw this guy appear, Qin Shi suddenly understood something. This group of United States people, they were really as annoying as flies. Sure enough, when the B-2 flew over Qin Shi's head, it suddenly opened the hatch and threw out two long objects. Qin Shi looked up at the two objects thrown out by the B-2 and suddenly couldn't help but show a dumbfounded expression on his face. Just now he was bullying Shui Xiang for being uneducated and asked if she could withstand a nuclear bomb. This is, retribution is here. Chapter 295. The B-2 was known as a stealth fighter, but it actually meant that it could avoid radar detection, not that it was actually invisible. Qin Shi frowned and looked at the things thrown out by the B-2. He didn't need to think about it before he concluded that the two things must be nuclear bombs. It was not that he knew about nuclear bombs, but because as an Earthling, Qin Shi was very clear about the morality of the United States. The United States, the world's recognized superpower, the world's overlord, and the Pacific Police. They drove nuclear-powered aircraft carriers all day long and naturally did not put any country or force in their eyes. Tonight's phenomenon appeared in international waters, and international waters had always been regarded as their backyard by the United States, so they wanted to join in the fun. There was nothing wrong with joining in the fun, but the mistake of the United States was, they didn't even understand the situation and they dared to directly fire at Shuixiang. The consequences of doing so were imaginable. Under Shuixiang's angry attack, a destroyer was gone, and an elite team equipped with exoskeleton armor was also gone. In terms of monetary value, the value of an exoskeleton armor was comparable to that of a destroyer, let alone a full combat squad. The Americans were infuriated by such a heavy loss, so they sent out another reconnaissance aircraft to investigate the situation. But just as the plane arrived, it was struck down by Qin Shi's sword. The successive attacks finally exhausted the last trace of patience of the United States. Since they couldn't get it, they would destroy it, just like Mahang 370 back then. Simple and violent. The B-2's flying speed was very fast. After dropping the nuclear bomb, it turned around and was ready to leave. Seeing this, Qin Shi couldn't help but sneer. Then he waved the long sword in his hand toward the sky. Just like a charged weapon in a sci-fi movie, the long metal sword suddenly burst out with a dazzling light. Immediately after, a white light shot out from the tip of the sword. The white light cut through the night sky. An explosion suddenly sounded in the sky. Boom. In the blink of an eye, the B-2 had turned into a fireball and fell straight from the sky. That scene really had a different kind of beauty. Just as Qin Shi hit the B-2, the two nuclear bombs had already landed not far above Qin Shi. Seeing this, Qin Shi suddenly raised his right hand towards the two nuclear bombs. It was like a traffic police officer making a stop sign. As soon as this gesture was made, the two nuclear bombs seemed to have been hit by a pause button and strangely stopped in mid-air. The two nuclear bombs weren't very big, only about 2 meters long. They seemed to be small nuclear bombs. One had to know that nuclear bombs were limited by their critical mass. It was usually easy to make a large one but difficult to make a small one. Therefore, in the entire world, only the United States could produce a small nuclear bomb of this size. Qin Shi thought for a moment, then tried to use his spiritual ether to destroy all the internal circuits of a nuclear bomb, completely turning it into scrap metal. As a highly educated person in modern society, Qin Shi was well aware of the value of this thing. Therefore, he was prepared to give this nuclear bomb to the country as a form of repayment to his country. As for the other one, of course, give it back to someone else. After all, it was a traditional virtue of the Chinese people to return the money they found. Thinking of this, Qin Shi used his spiritual ether to bind the two nuclear bombs, then quickly flew in the direction of the Okinawa Islands. The Okinawa Islands were known as the Ryukyu Islands in ancient times. Taiwan's ancient name was Ryukyu. Because of various historical reasons, the Okinawa Islands were now under the jurisdiction of Japan. This location was very special. It was only 600 kilometers away from the bay and 400 kilometers away from the Diaoyu Islands. Since the end of World War II, the United States had established a military base in the Okinawa Islands and regarded it as an important cornerstone of the Pacific Rim strategic plan. In fact, this military base with 50,000 soldiers had always been a sword of Damocles hanging over Wuxia's head. The United States fighter jets took off from the base and could arrive in Wuxia in less than 20 minutes. Therefore, this place was also called by the United States military, the unsinkable aircraft carrier. When Qin Shi flew over the Okinawa military base, the base was as bright as day. Soldiers the size of ants moved back and forth in the base, and many fighter jets were neatly parked on the runway, looking like they were ready to take off at any time. Looking at this situation, the base should be in a state of level 1 combat readiness. Thinking about it, even the nuclear bombs were taken out. Wasn't this a war? Qin Shi originally wanted to throw down the nuclear bombs and leave, but when he saw the densely packed soldiers below, he still hesitated in his heart. Although everyone's skin color was different, they were still fresh lives after all. Maybe it was because he had been with Nian for too long. Qin Shi did indeed respect life more than before. Therefore, after hesitating for a moment, He raised the long sword in his hand and slashed at the runway below. The white sword light shot out from the long sword and became bigger and bigger in the air. When the sword light hit the airport runway below, it instantly left a huge gully like a moat on the runway. Boom! The huge explosion alarmed the entire base. The rapid ear-piercing alarm suddenly sounded, and the soldiers moved one after another, entering a state of combat as quickly as possible. At this moment, Qin Shi's deep voice suddenly sounded from the sky. Qin Shi's voice accurately reached everyone's ears, as if a god had come down to deliver a decree. I'll give you half an hour to organize a retreat. After half an hour, I'll use a nuclear bomb to destroy this place. I repeat, a nuclear bomb that you won't be able to intercept. So, I sincerely advise you to cherish your lives, stay away from war and leave. In order to make these soldiers understand, Qin Shi even used English, which she hadn't used in 500 years. It could be said that she was being extremely benevolent. As for whether they would listen or not, this obviously wasn't something Qin Shi needed to worry about. Therefore, after throwing out these harsh words, Qin Shi sat cross-legged in the sky and silently began the countdown. Half an hour. If they really wanted to retreat with the reserves of this military base, it was actually a very easy thing to do. But to Qin Shi's surprise, the soldiers in the base didn't have the slightest intention of evacuating. Instead, they entered a state of combat. In an instant, dozens of combat aircraft flew out of the base. At the same time, many air defense equipment hidden underground were also activated, ready to launch at any time. Perhaps because the United States was confident in intercepting any nuclear attack, Qin Shi waited for half an hour and didn't see anyone leaving the base, so he could only helplessly sigh. There's a path to heaven, but you don't want to take it, and there's no door to hell, sigh. Qin Shi didn't want to see the hellish scene, so he wrapped the nuclear bomb with his energy and quietly threw the nuclear bomb at the base. After that, he directly left with the 2 spoils of war and the nuclear bomb. Not long after he left, an earth-shattering explosion rang out as expected. Chapter 296. The aircraft carrier that claimed to be unsinkable, sunk. In fact, Qin Shi had always been curious about a question, and that was, could he resist the attack of a nuclear bomb with his body? Even a small nuclear bomb had a temperature of at least 50 million degrees Celsius at the center of the explosion. This temperature was actually equivalent to the surface temperature of the sun. The only difference between the two was that the sun could continue to heat up, while a nuclear bomb only had a short burst. However, the short moment of the nuclear bomb explosion was enough to melt all the cement and steel within a kilometer into liquid, and even vaporize it into gas invisible to the naked eye. The shock wave generated by the explosion would destroy all the buildings within a 3-kilometer radius. In addition, there was also radioactive pollution that would last for decades once it was leaked. Nuclear bombs were the crystallization of human wisdom. In terms of social status, they were at least comparable to innate treasures. Therefore, Qin Shi was still a little uncertain about whether nuclear bombs could threaten him. After all, he couldn't run to the center of the explosion and use himself as a live experiment in order to verify whether nuclear bombs could hurt him, right? Then wouldn't he be a moron? Qin Shi decisively put this problem behind him, and then returned to Jianghu with another nuclear bomb. When Qin Shi returned to Jianghu, he found that Qin Shui had taken people to block the coastline and even the estuary of Dianjiang overnight, prohibiting any people or ships from entering Jianghu. Qin Shi flew along the coastline. After finding the temporary command post built by Qin Shui on the beach, he threw the nuclear bomb down in front of Qin Shui's stunned expression. When Qin Shui finally reacted and chased out of the command post in a panic, Qin Shi had already disappeared into the horizon. The next morning, when the little guy sat up from the bed with sleepy eyes, Qin Shi and Qin Ruoying were sitting on the sofa outside, watching the morning news with relish. Because of the nuclear explosion accident last night, the media all over the world rushed to report it as if they were on steroids. As a result, this news spread all over the world in an instant, so now at least half of the people on Earth were paying attention to this matter. Finally, 2 hours after the accident, the White House spokesperson finally came forward to explain the cause of the nuclear leakage accident at the Okinawa military base. It was said that a certain staff member had made a mistake and caused an explosion in the laboratory, causing a series of chain reactions. First, it detonated the arsenal, then it set fire to the hangar next to it. In the end, even a nuclear submarine temporarily docked at the port for maintenance was affected, causing the nuclear reactor inside the nuclear submarine to malfunction and explode, leading to such a serious nuclear leak disaster. The Okinawa military base was an important part of the Pacific Rim strategic plan. Even during non-war times there were at least 20,000 soldiers stationed in the base. But now, less than a tenth of the 20,000 soldiers survived. Even if some were lucky enough to survive, their bodies had been severely contaminated by nuclear radiation. Their future situation was definitely not optimistic. In terms of economics, because it was not a civilian facility, it was estimated that the economic losses caused by this accident were at least $500 billion US. This number, it was almost close to the military expenditure of the United States for a whole year. In other words, the seriousness of this accident was no less than the Pearl Harbor incident during World War II. What annoyed the United States the most was, this nuclear bomb originally belonged to them. Throwing a nuclear bomb in the Pacific Ocean was not something that the United States, who had always liked to maintain world peace, would do. Therefore, even if the losses were huge, the United States could only swallow their pride. They had to conceal the truth of the accident and forcibly make up a lie that could not stand up to scrutiny at all. As for what the truth of this matter was, and what kind of undercurrent was surging behind it, it was obviously not something that ordinary people could understand. The little girl sat on the bed and rubbed her eyes with her small hands. Then, like a kitten, she pouted and called out softly, "Mama?" It could be seen that after this period of hard work, Qin Ruoying had successfully occupied a position equal to Chen Shi in the little girl's heart. In the little girl's heart, Papa and Mama were finally on the same level. Qin Ruoying was now considered to have succeeded in qi cultivation, and the sensitivity of her 5 senses had been greatly improved. Therefore, after hearing the little girl's cry, she quickly ran into the bedroom and took the little girl to wash up. At this time, Chen Shi went to the kitchen and brought out the 8 treasure porridge that he carefully cooked. A plate of delicious shrimp dumplings and a few side dishes. This was the little girl's favorite breakfast now. The couple served the little princess breakfast and accompanied her to recite a few ancient poems. Then they discussed today's itinerary. They had already been to their alma mater and met their classmates and friends. So what should they do next? The couple was now like nouveau riche. They had a lot of money in their pockets. Just the bank interest alone was enough to make them comfortable, so they only needed to eat, drink, and play all day long. They were happy to be social parasites. Therefore, where to take Nyenyen to play became a problem that they needed to struggle with every day. The two of them didn't struggle for long. Qin Ruoying's phone suddenly rang. The caller was Lin Xian. After yesterday's catching up, the revolutionary friendship between the two of them could be said to have been re-established. "Ying, I told Lei the news of your return. She was so happy. So she asked me to ask you out today. She wants to have a good gathering in our dormitory." "Okay, where is it?" "Let me tell you first, I'm going to bring my husband." Speaking of this, Qin Ruoying very playfully winked at Chen Shi. In the past, when their dormitory had dinner together, Chen Shi was not qualified to participate. However, now was different. Her boyfriend had already become her husband. Naturally, Qin Ruoying would bring Chen Shi. After hearing Qin Ruoying's words, Lin Xian on the other end of the phone did not immediately reply. She was silent for a while on the other end of the phone. Then she coughed lightly and pretended to be calm as she replied, "Okay, don't show off your affection in front of me. You haven't met Lei's fiancé yet, right? Let her introduce him to you tonight. You have sharp eyes, so you have to help her interrogate him. Anyway, they haven't registered their marriage yet. It's not too late for Lei to back out now." Tui, what are you saying? Since they're already engaged, it must be true love, right? What's there to interrogate? I can't say too much about other people's matters. Because they were too close, Qin Ruoying did not shy away from joking over the phone. However, after hearing her words, Lin Xian did not seem to be joking at all. Instead, she said very seriously, "Ying, I'm serious. My woman's intuition tells me that Lei's fiancé is not simple." "Oh." Hearing this, Qin Ruoying could not help but glance at Chen Shi in confusion. Chen Shi attended Fang Lei's wedding. With his sharp 5 senses, even without studying psychology, he was very accurate in judging people. Therefore, Qin Ruoying wanted to hear Chen Shi's evaluation of this person. However, at this time, Chen Shi frowned slightly. Speaking of which, what was the name of Fang Lei's fiancé? If he remembered correctly, his name was Wang Shiwu? But why did this person not leave a deep impression on him? After all, Chen Shi now had the ability to remember everything he saw. Therefore, he was very sure that this person had not appeared in front of him more than a few times. Chapter 297. The dormitory gathering that had been away for many years was set at 7 o'clock tonight, and the dining location was chosen by Fang Lei at a well-known high-end restaurant in Zhonghai. Lin Xian disliked her for being extravagant and wasteful, but she didn't expect to be choked back by Fang Lei's words. Everyone had graduated for so many years, they couldn't still go to a street food stall for the gathering, right? Lin Xian couldn't refute. Listening to Fang Lei's proud laughter on the phone, Lin Xian simply decided on the theme of tonight's gathering. Tonight's theme was, Eat the Rich. The gathering didn't start until the evening, so the couple watched cartoons with the little guy at home all day. It wasn't until 4 o'clock in the afternoon that the family of 3 finally went out. When Qin walked out of the building with the little guy in his arms, the little guy was instantly stunned by the scene in front of him. He opened his small mouth and screamed, "Papa!" The tree fell. And that one fell too. Because of Qin's meditation mantra last night, the little guy was in a deep sleep and didn't know what was going on outside. Last night's natural phenomenon made the people of Zhonghai experience the helplessness of a disaster. In the face of the wrath of nature, human beings were still too small. For Zhonghai, a place with good feng shui, earthquakes and tsunamis were big events that were enough to be recorded in history. Compared to the Okinawa nuclear accident that was far away, the natural disasters that the people of Zhonghai experienced were obviously more likely to attract social attention. Therefore, today's WeChat moments were basically occupied by the words earthquake, rainstorm, tsunami, and other words. All kinds of short videos about last night also rushed to the top of the trending list. Even those who were not in Zhonghai had a rough idea of how terrible last night was. Although the news had reported that the earthquake didn't cause any casualties, it still left a big shadow on everyone. For example, the trees that were blown down by the wind on the roadside gave people a feeling of lingering fear. Kangju residential area was an old residential area, so after the rainstorm, the problems in the residential area's drainage system were all exposed. The residential area did not hire a professional property management, so naturally no one came to clean up the puddles. Therefore, when they left the building, the path was full of puddles. The deepest part was at least 4 to 5 centimeters thick. Qin had no choice but to hold the little fellow in one hand and hold Qin Ruoying in the other. The family of 3 stepped on the edge of the flower bed and slowly walked out of the community. The little fellow laid on Qin's shoulder and stretched out his head to look at the puddles on the ground. He immediately seemed to have thought of something and hurriedly hugged Qin's neck and acted coquettishly. "Papa, do a magic trick. I want to see you perform a magic trick." The magic trick she was talking about was obviously the magic trick Qin performed when he carried her to Kunming Lake at night. Walking on the water, a lotus blossomed with every step. As long as this kind of inhuman behavior was displayed in front of her once, as long as she saw a similar scene in the future, this little thing would naturally connect the dots. Hearing this, Qin smiled and said to her, "Daddy has already taught Mommy this trick. Let Mommy show you, okay?" Seeing that the little fellow nodded her little head like she was pounding garlic, Qin Ruoying could only ask with a dumbfounded expression, "What trick? Why didn't I know that I could perform a magic trick?" "You can. Come on, I'll tell you." Then Qin leaned over to Qin Ruoying's ear and briefly told Qin Ruoying about walking on the water. But when Qin Ruoying heard Qin's words, she put on a speechless expression. Seeing this, Qin gently squeezed his palm. Qin Ruoying said helplessly, "I'm not as capable as you. Ying, try it. You can do it." After this period of cultivation, Qin Ruoying had successfully stepped into the late stage of qi refining, which was equivalent to a martial artist in the gang realm. It was almost the realm before Qin Shueqing met Qin Shi. However, Qin Ruoying did not have the foundation of martial arts and had never fought with others, so she was not confident in herself. The reason why Qin Shi asked her to perform a magic trick for Yin was to tell her a fact from the side, that was, she was no longer an ordinary person. However, Qin Ruoying was obviously not mentally prepared for this. Because Qin did not teach her magic, Qin Ruoying felt that there was nothing special about her except that her physical strength and 5 senses had been greatly improved. Ying, try to push the vital energy to your leg. Just like what is said in the martial arts movies, calm down first and then sink the qi into your dantian. Yes, that's it. Treat the water as the ground. Don't be afraid, step on it. Qin stood aside with the little fellow in his arms. Then, Qin Ruoying slowly stretched out her right leg toward the water under the gaze of the father and daughter. She was wearing a pair of flat shoes today. As soon as the sharp tips of her shoes touched the water, ripples immediately appeared on the water surface. There was no feeling of touching anything. Qin Ruoying looked at Qin with some doubts, but Qin just smiled and nodded to her, motioning her to continue. At this moment, the little fellow was also interested in the strange behavior of the couple. So like a good baby, she sat quietly in Qin's arms, and her big eyes stared motionlessly at Qin Ruoying's toes. Seeing this, Qin Ruoying suddenly laughed, and then directly stepped into the water. Anyway, the water was not deep, almost reaching the back of the shoes. As long as she tiptoed slightly, the water would not soak into her shoes. However, just as Qin Ruoying's left foot stepped into the water, the little fellow's exclamation suddenly sounded. "Mama is so amazing. I want to learn it too. Papa, teach me. Teach me." The little fellow clapped and screamed, and excitedly twisted in Qin Shi's arms. "Nyan be good. This trick can only be performed when you grow taller. When you are as tall as me, I will teach you, okay?" "No." After hearing Qin Shi's refusal, the little fellow suddenly pouted and looked unhappy. While the father and daughter were showing off their love, Qin Ruoying was still a little stunned. That feeling was very strange. It was like stepping on a plastic bag full of water. The water in the plastic bag was fluctuating, so her body swayed slightly. Qin Ruoying tried to withdraw her true essence. Sure enough, her body immediately lost its support and fell into the water, splashing a circle of water. "It's okay, Yingying, you are not familiar with it. Try again." Seeing that she fell into the water, Qin Shi immediately comforted her. However, Qin Ruoying had a thoughtful expression, as if she did not hear at all. Then, in Qin Shi's slightly surprised eyes, she took a step forward by herself, just as described in the Luo Shin Fu. The light body stands like a crane, as if about to fly but not to soar. Walking on the path of pepper, the steps are thin but the fragrance is flowing. Seeing that Qin Ruoying walked on the water so leisurely, Qin Shi could not help but be stunned. This was the first time Yingying used her true essence, right? Her comprehension, very good. Just when Qin Shi was about to praise her, Qin Ruoying suddenly said thoughtfully, "Shi, you said that you can push your true essence to your feet. Can you also push it to your hands?" After that, she gently waved her sleeves at the branch beside her. Then, in front of Qin Shi's shocked expression, a weak true yuan directly hit the branch. Crash. Chapter 298. Looking at the branch that had fallen to the ground, Qin Shi was so surprised that he was speechless for a moment. Although Qin Ruoying had been cultivating for a period of time, she was still at the stage of refining the heaven and earth spiritual qi, and diligently accumulating true essence. One must know that Qin Ruoying did not have any foundation in martial arts, so her ability to control qi in the air made Qin Shi very surprised. After all, Qin Shi had not taught Qin Ruoying how to use true essence. Today, because the little fellow was in the mood, Qin Shi thought of letting Qin Ruoying try. He did not expect that Qin Ruoying's perception was so good that she could understand with just a little bit, and could even draw inferences about other things from one example. A falling leaf reveals the autumn of the world, a glimpse of a spot reveals the whole leopard. The so-called cultivation naturally paid attention to aptitude, bone structure, and perception. All three were indispensable. If aptitude and bone structure represented the body, then perception obviously represented the brain. After Qin Shi's observation during this period of time, he found that Qin Ruoying's aptitude and bone structure were very ordinary. If she continued to cultivate according to her current cultivation speed, then Yuanying should be the limit that Qin Ruoying could reach in this lifetime. Maybe it was because she had lost her Yin soul before. Even after Qin Ruoying's 3 souls returned, her cultivation speed did not improve much. Compared to his sister-in-law, it was simply heaven and earth. This also made Qin Shi subconsciously think that, was Qin Ruoying's perception as ordinary as her bone structure? Because of this consideration, Qin Shi did not teach Qin Ruoying those seemingly fancy little spells, but let her concentrate on refining qi, and refining qi, using all her time to refine the heaven and earth spiritual qi. As the saying goes, the clumsy bird flies first. As long as he was there, if he wanted to hurt Qin Ruoying, he would have to step over his dead body first. Naturally, there was no need for her to waste time learning any self-defense skills. However, Qin Ruoying's performance today was completely beyond Qin Shi's expectations. This kind of perception, I'm afraid that she can already catch up with me in the past, right? Thinking of this, Qin Shi could not help but look happy, and quickly stretched out his left hand and snapped his fingers. Pa! After a crisp sound, a weak flame jumped out of Qin Shi's fingers. Yingying, why don't you try it? Hearing this, before Qin Ruoying could say anything, the little guy in Qin Shi's arms suddenly shouted excitedly. Fire? Papa can spit fire? Is this a magic trick? I want to learn. I want to learn. Papa, teach me. The little fellow was very excited. However, Qin Shi did not pay attention to her at all. After pinching her little face to signal her to be quiet, Qin Shi told Qin Ruoying the trick of this magic trick. After listening to Qin Shi's explanation, Qin Ruoying thought for a while, and then asked directly, Fire control magic trick? Is it like this? As soon as she finished speaking, she followed Qinshi's example and snapped her fingers. Soon after, a small flame jumped out from between her fingers. She really learned and applied it immediately without any delay. "Ying, I really didn't expect your perception to be so good," Qinshi praised from the bottom of her heart. Qin Ruoying smiled and was about to say something when the little fellow in Qinshi's arms suddenly exploded. Perhaps it was because she had been neglected by her parents, so the little fellow was really unstoppable at this time. They saw. She pursed her little mouth and bean-sized tears kept pouring out of her eyes like a tap that had been opened, and she kept sobbing. It was as if she had suffered a great grievance. Her tear-stained face was really pitiful. Qinshi was stunned by the little fellow's sudden crying. He quickly held her in his arms and comforted her softly. After being interrupted by her, the couple suddenly lost their interest, so they quickly walked out of the community, took a taxi, and went straight to the party address sent by Lin Xian. The dining location was set by Fang Lei. With her status, she naturally would not choose a street stall. Therefore, when Qinshi and his family arrived at the agreed place, the couple was surprised to find that the place was not like a restaurant at all, but more like a vacation villa. Number 1 Mansion. That was the name of the restaurant. The so-called mansion was actually a bungalow on the beach that often appeared in anti-war dramas. This kind of very old building was very common in Zhonghai. In a sense, the mansion in Zhonghai was somewhat similar to the courtyard houses in Shangjing. It had changed from a simple residence to a cultural symbol. Although number 1 Mansion was located in the city center, it was on a remote road. On the clean street, pedestrians in 2s and 3s, as well as 2 rows of lush camphor trees, gave people a very peaceful and comfortable feeling. After getting out of the taxi, the little fellow obediently lay in Qinshi's arms. It was impossible to tell that she had just cried. And the reason why she was so obedient now was entirely because of the lighter in her hand. The little fellow excitedly fiddled with the lighter. Because she pressed the buttons so quickly, her thumb was a little red. But she did not feel tired at all. Instead, she constantly lit the fire and pressed the lighter non-stop. Looking at the flame that kept coming out of the lighter, the little thing was very happy as it twisted around in Qinshi's arms. She also knew how to do magic. When he thought of this, he suddenly couldn't help but grin foolishly. In fact, this lighter was something that Qinshi had shamelessly asked for from the taxi driver. There was no sign outside the mansion, only 2 people wearing cheongsam stood outside to welcome guests. Qin Ruoying was not sure if she found the right place, so she called Lin Xian. Not long after, Lin Xian came out of the closed door of the mansion. Although they hadn't seen each other for a day, when Lin Xian saw Qinshi's family again, her face still showed a very happy smile. "Bing, Qinshi, here, come in." Lin Xian greeted her. After taking the little fellow from Qinshi's arms into her own arms, she smiled and said to Qin Ruoying, "Ying, you're in for a treat tonight. This number 1 mansion's reputation in Zhonghai is very good. Lei has to treat today, so don't be polite with her later. You must take advantage of her." As she spoke, Lin Xian led Qinshi's family into the mansion. After all, it was an old building from the Republic of China. Although it was now converted into a restaurant, the restaurant owner deliberately kept some of the common Chinese and Western decorations of that era. It looked very unique. Fang Lei booked a table on the 2nd floor near the balcony. Lin Xian led Qinshi's family to the 2nd floor. Fang Lei saw them at a glance, so she stood up and greeted with a smile, "Ying, long time no see." Fang Lei's personality was somewhat similar to Qin Ruoying's. They were the kind of people who didn't show their emotions easily, so this simple greeting contained a lot of emotions. If the relationship between Qin Ruoying and Lin Xian was warm, then the relationship between her and Fang Lei was indifferent. Just as the old saying goes, the friendship between gentlemen is as indifferent as water. This indifference didn't mean indifference, but it meant purity and purity. The 2 of them held hands and chatted softly for a while before Qin Ruoying shifted her gaze to the man beside Fang Lei. "Lei, this is? Let me introduce, this is my fiancé Wang Shiwu." Hearing Fang Lei's introduction, Wang Shiwu stretched out his right hand and said with a smile, "Miss Qin, nice to meet you. I used to hear your name from Lei and now I've finally met you in person. You're much more beautiful than I expected. Thank you." Qin Ruoying nodded. When she was about to shake hands with Wang Shiwu, Qinshi suddenly appeared from the side. Then, under the slightly surprised gaze of Fang Lei and Qin Ruoying, he directly shook Wang Shiwu's hand. Chapter 299. Seeing Qinshi emerge from the side with a smile, Wang Shiwu could not help but be taken aback. Is he not allowing his wife to shake hands with other men? To be honest, Qinshi's action was indeed a little rude, and it would make him seem very narrow-minded. After all, it was a social occasion. Wang Shiwu wanted to shake hands with Qin Ruoying, who was meeting for the first time, only out of courtesy. But Qin Shi's reaction. Wang Shiwu was stunned for a moment, and he could only smile awkwardly. Then he turned to shake Qin Shi's hand. They were all friends, and Qin Shi had attended his and Fang Lei's wedding before, so Wang Shiwu naturally could not be angry over such a small matter. Mr. Qin, you're so lucky. Your wife is so beautiful, and she gave birth to such a cute and obedient daughter for you. I'm so envious. Wang Shiwu smiled and said a few polite words to Qin Shi. But after Qin Shi heard this, he looked at Wang Shiwu thoughtfully, then replied with a fake smile, "Thank you." After that, he withdrew his right hand. Such an impolite behavior really made Wang Shiwu a little confused. Luckily he had a good temper. If it were a hot-tempered second-generation rich kid, he would have flipped out and smashed the bowl. What kind of attitude is this? Qin Shi's behavior made the atmosphere a little awkward, and at this time Fang Lei's voice suddenly came from the side. What Ying is beautiful, but I'm not. She glanced at Wang Shiwu with a smile that was not a smile. She put on a jealous look, which immediately livened up the atmosphere. Beautiful. Of course you're beautiful. Your dorm mates are all very good-looking. Hearing this, Wang Shiwu immediately laughed, and then went with the excuse Fang Lei gave him. Then Fang Lei asked everyone to take a seat, and the topic finally returned to the three women. Qin Ruoying chatted with Fang Lei for a while. When the waiter came to ask if the dishes could be served, Qin Ruoying seemed to have thought of something. She quickly asked, "By the way, Xian, where's your boyfriend? Why don't I see him?" Hearing this, Lin Xian immediately explained with a smile, "He has to work overtime tonight, so he can't make it." "I'm sorry, it's nothing, Xian. I was just asking." Qin Ruoying nodded. She and Qin Shi were both unemployed, so she naturally had to understand the difficulties of office workers, so she didn't continue to ask. "Where's Lulu? Didn't you call her? She said she would rush over as soon as she got off work. She should be here soon." Fang Lei looked down at the time on her phone and found that it was almost 6 o'clock in the evening, so she turned to look outside the door. Sure enough, not long after her voice fell, two figures walked in from outside the door. One of them was Wang Lu, and the other, it was Li Xiuwen, who came uninvited. The moment she saw Li Xiuwen appear, Lin Xian frowned a little unnaturally. Qin Ruoying noticed the strangeness on Lin Xian's face, but she couldn't figure out the relationship between them, so she asked softly, "Is that Wang Lu's husband?" "I know he is Wang Lu's boss. He can be considered as Lin Xian's suitor. He has been pursuing her for several years." "Oh." Hearing this, Qin Ruoying nodded thoughtfully. She hadn't participated in such a social occasion for a long time. It felt so complicated. After Wang Lu and Li Xiuwen entered, they went straight to the second floor. Li Xiuwen's family and Fang Lei's family had some business dealings, so when Fang Lei got engaged, Li Xiuwen also received an invitation. In a sense, all these years, because of Wang Lu, Li Xiuwen and Fang Lei could be considered friends. Therefore, when Li Xiuwen came to the second floor, he went straight to Fang Lei and said to her with a smile, "I heard from Lulu that you're having dinner here today. Coincidentally, I don't have anything going on tonight, so I wanted to shamelessly come over and freeload a meal. You don't mind, right?" "Of course not, please sit anywhere." Then Fang Lei pointed to the empty seat on the side. Li Xiuwen seemed to be very familiar with Wang Shiwu, so after greeting everyone with a smile, he sat directly next to Wang Shiwu. Lin Xian just so happened to be standing opposite him. Seeing this, Lin Xian's face suddenly turned cold. Without saying a word, she got up and sat next to Qin Ruoying, then pulled Qin Ruoying aside and whispered to her. As the host, Fang Lei saw everything clearly. Therefore, she could only sigh silently in her heart. It was a dormitory gathering. Why did it suddenly turn out like this? Fang Lei booked a Western-style long-table banquet tonight. The distance between each seat was very wide, so during the meal, there was a clear dividing line on the table. On one side was Qin Shi's family of 3 and Lin Xian. On the other side was Fang Lei and her husband, followed by Wang Lu and Li Xiuwen. Wang Lu tried to lead the topic to Lin Xian several times, but Lin Xian acted as if she did not hear at all. She was focused on serving the little guy food, making the little guy happy. Dinner began under such a strange atmosphere. Ever since Li Xiuwen appeared, Lin Xian did not speak loudly. Everyone could see that she was very unhappy tonight. Seeing Lin Xian's bad attitude, Li Xiuwen's patience seemed to have reached its limit. Therefore, after a quick dinner, he directly said goodbye. Wang Lu could not stop him. In the end, she could only send him off with Fang Lei. Li Xiuwen stood outside the entrance of the residence. He looked at the second floor where Lin Xian was with a complicated expression. Then, as if he had finally made a decision, he put away the smile on his face and turned to leave quickly. Looking at Li Xiuwen's back as he left, even Fang Lei could not help but scold Wang Lu. "Lulu, what's wrong with you? Is this how you flatter people? You know that Xian Xian doesn't like Li Xiuwen. Do you really think that Xian Xian will be moved by your efforts to let Xian Xian meet Li Xiuwen? Don't be stupid, okay? If you continue to interfere with Xian Xian's feelings, we can't even be friends anymore." After saying that, Fang Lei went back to the residence angrily, leaving Wang Lu standing outside the door in a daze. It was a dormitory gathering, but she turned it into a failed blind date. The dinner ended in this extremely unpleasant atmosphere. Wang Lu drove back by herself. Lin Xian came by taxi, so Fang Lei offered to give Lin Xian a ride, but was rejected by Lin Xian. Qin Ruoying held the little girl's hand and stood beside Qin Shi. After watching Lin Xian get into the taxi and leave, she asked curiously, "Shi, what's wrong with you? I feel that you're a little weird tonight." Hearing that, Qin Shi smiled and shook his head. He held her hand and said softly in her ear, "I feel that something big is going to happen tonight. How about this, you bring Yin Yin back first, I'll go check on the situation. I'll be back soon." Something big. Qin Ruoying was stunned for a moment, then a worried expression appeared on her face. Seeing that, Qin Shi smiled and touched her cheek. He comforted her gently, "Don't worry, I'm here." Chapter 300. In Qin Shi's eyes, the night seemed calm, but in fact, it was turbulent. That was because he actually found a similarity between Wang Shiwu and Li Xiuwen. Two famous second-generation princes in Zhonghai. There were signs of spiritual energy fluctuations in their bodies. This was obviously not a coincidence. The two of them could be considered old acquaintances, so Qin Shi was very sure that in the past 6 months, something must have happened to them. While shaking hands with Wang Shiwu, Qin Shi quietly put a trace of true yuan into his body, and then carefully studied it. Then he found that Wang Shiwu should have practiced some kind of cultivation method, and there was obviously some impure true yuan accumulated in his body. But what made Qin Shi feel a little strange was that this true yuan had a bit of a strange and evil feeling. Since Qin Shi returned to Earth, he had already seen a lot of incomplete inheritances unique to Earth. Great-granduncle was a martial artist, Sunwen was a necromancer, Saitu Ijiro was a Onmyoji, and there was also the Brahmin. Although these inheritances were incomplete, they could still be considered as orthodox, and in the end they could step into the celestial being. The celestial being, in the eyes of immortal cultivators, was the pseudo-core realm, and was only one step away from condensing the golden core. The reason why they could not go further was mainly because of the environmental limitations of Earth. From a scientific point of view, under the action of natural selection, the mutation of a mutated individual who was more adaptable to the environment was a beneficial mutation, and thus they could continue to survive. And the mutation of a mutated individual who was not adapted to the environment was a disadvantageous mutation. Unable to adapt to the environment, they were destined to be eliminated by the environment. Therefore, no matter what kind of creature it was, in the end, it was inseparable from the 4 words, natural selection, survival of the fittest. In the case of being eliminated at any time, great-granduncle placed all his hopes on the illusory divine gate, and talented people like Sunwen tried to rely on their own efforts to continue to move forward. As long as he could go further, he was willing to pay any price, even if it meant killing innocent people. For example, the extremely evil 5 elements soul cultivation technique. One had to know that evil and filth were existences that were rejected by cultivators. It wasn't that this kind of cultivation method couldn't be cultivated, but it was because this kind of cultivation method usually went against ethics and principles. It was even harmful to the heavens and devoid of humanity. There were no taboos in doing things, and everything was done only for oneself. Therefore, this type of immortal cultivator was also called heretical cultivators. In the heavenly jade world, heretical cultivators were like street rats. They were hated by everyone. However, the environment was against evil cultivators, but their legacies were still being passed down. The main reason was that the evil path was faster, stronger, and easier to survive than the traditional cultivation methods. Yin-Yang masters used their blood essence to water Yin souls and create spirit-branded retainers that were related to their lives. This method was indeed a bit unorthodox compared to necromancers and martial artists, but it wasn't considered evil. After all, Yin-Yang masters only used their own blood essence to nourish their spirit-branded retainers, while Yin-Yang masters used their own blood essence and divine sense to strengthen themselves. The two could not be compared at all. Up until now, Qin Shi only knew of Sun Wen's 5-element soul cultivation technique that could truly be considered evil on earth. But Sun Wen had already been subdued by him. Now, in addition to enduring the torture of the heart-devouring ants every day, he also had to work day and night for Wu Lian for free. So the question was, who was the heretical cultivator behind Wang Shiwu and Li Xiuwen? Since these two were young masters with a certain social status, it meant that many people in their circle had already fallen into the hands of the heretical cultivator. The reason why the heretical cultivator chose the second generation was probably because of their social influence. After all, it was easier to commit heinous crimes without being noticed by others with power and influence. Perhaps it was because he cultivated an evil cultivation method. Li Xiuwen's behavior tonight was clearly a bit out of place. Logically speaking, it wasn't the first time that he was ignored by Lin Xian. He should have been mentally prepared. But when Li Xiuwen left, he suddenly looked meaningfully at Lin Xian. At that moment, his gaze was indeed very complicated. Thinking of this, Qin Shi could not help but secretly sigh. Actually, in his heart, Li Xiuwen was quite a good person. No matter what, Li Xiuwen had wholeheartedly pursued Lin Xian for many years. Even if he had many flaws, he was not as unforgivable as Zhao Yuan. But now, Li Xiuwen's patience seemed to have finally run out. The two young masters who couldn't get along with each other had now become locusts on the same rope. Holding hands, they walked further and further away on the road of death. Wang Shiwu should have started cultivating earlier than Li Xiuwen, so his cultivation was obviously higher than Li Xiuwen's. Therefore, after some consideration, Qin Shi secretly left a restriction on Lin Xian's body and turned to leave with Wang Shiwu. Wang Shiwu and Fang Lei were not officially married yet, so they did not live together. Therefore, after he drove Fang Lei home, he turned around and returned to his own house. Qin Shi flew in the air and followed Wang Shiwu all the way. Qin Shi could not be more familiar with Zhonghai. Therefore, after seeing Wang Shiwu drive into a high-end residential area by the river, Qin Shi could not help but sneer. As the end of the Yangtze River, there were a total of 40 rivers in Zhonghai. Because there were too many rivers, even the natives of Zhonghai City didn't know the name of each river. There was only one exception, and that was the inland river in front of Qin Shi called Chai River. The name Chai River was widely spread among the older generation, and it could be said that there was no one who did not know of it. The reason why Chai River was so famous was mainly because of its other name, Yinyang River. It was said that many people died here during the War of Resistance, and corpses and blood filled the entire Chai River. Therefore, this place had always been gloomy and filled with hostility. Many people scoffed at this legend. That was because they completely ignored the cemetery of martyrs that covered an area of about 200,000 square meters. This cemetery of martyrs was now called Longhua Garden, but 60 years ago, it had another famous name, Bloodflower Garden. Blood dyed the Wuxia red. The hostility was indeed heavy. After decades of development, the Bloodflower Garden went from a suburb to the current city center, and the mountains of corpses and seas of blood seemed to be covered by the dust of history. From the current perspective, the residential area where Wang Shiwu lived was actually not bad. Facing the Chai River, it was quiet in the midst of chaos, and it had a unique flavor. However, if one looked down from the sky, they would find that this residential area faced the Yinyang River and had the Bloodflower Garden behind it. It was simply a place where evil gathered. The residential area was called Longhua Villa, and it was a high-end area. Some of it were bungalows while the rest were all detached villas. Since it was a detached villa, there was naturally a small garden in each villa. Qin Shi silently landed outside Wang Shiwu's garden and silently watched Wang Shiwu park the car and then return to the villa door. However, the moment Wang Shiwu opened the door, Qin Shi's line of sight unimpeded went directly from the front yard to the back garden. Seeing through the entire villa at a glance? One had to know that from the perspective of feng shui, this kind of house layout was legendary, heart-piercing evil spirit. The number one evil spirit of the Yang Mansion. Chapter 301. The place where the living lived was called the Yang Residence, and the place where the dead lived was called the Yin Residence. Since it was a place where the living lived, it naturally had to pay attention to feng shui. The so-called heart-piercing evil spirit actually referred to the kind of residence where one could see the other end of the house at a glance while standing outside the door. As one of the 10 great evil spirits of feng shui, heart-piercing evil spirit had been a taboo existence for the people of Wuxia since ancient times. Now that the real estate industry was at its peak, the architectural design profession naturally became a popular profession. Not to mention the local architectural designers of Wuxia, Even those famous foreign designers who didn't know much about the traditional culture of Wuxia would absolutely not be stupid enough to design a house with heart-piercing evil spirit pattern. After all, feng shui was something passed down by the ancestors, and was an indispensable and important part of Wuxia's culture. If the developer really wanted to sell a house with heart-piercing evil spirit pattern in Wuxia, it was estimated that before the official opening, the sales department would be filled with wreaths by some nosy old people. Although there were many young people who didn't understand this, and some of them wanted to pursue something different, and wanted to knock down a wall in their own house and forcibly create a heart-piercing evil spirit pattern. Then the renovation company or workers with some experience should also kindly remind them, don't court death. Of course, the more auspicious the house, the better. Although living in a house with heart-piercing evil spirit didn't mean that one would be unlucky. But if they were really unlucky, who would they blame? They could only blame themselves for being too stubborn at that time. Longhua Courtyard faced the Yinyang River and backed by the Bloodflower Garden. This location itself was very bad, and if the heart-piercing evil spirit pattern was added, where was the Yang residence? It was clearly a place of great evil that even the dead didn't want to stay in. As the saying goes, a fall into the pit, a gain in your wit. These seemingly mysterious and superstitious cultural inheritances were actually like the lunar calendar. It was knowledge that the ancestors used thousands of years to accumulate. In Qin Shi's view, feng shui was actually the simplest application of array. Why was the feng shui of Longhua Courtyard said that the feng shui was bad? Mainly because the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in this place was extremely sparse. The spiritual energy of heaven and earth was the foundation of all things, and this place was perfectly round, forming a sealed space. The heaven and earth spirit chi from the outside couldn't come in, and the yin and evil chi accumulated inside. If ordinary people stayed here for a long time, it was easy for them to get sick. This was the so-called yang deficiency in Chinese medicine. Qin Shi took the opportunity to look at the few villas next to him and found that none of them had the same layout as Wang Shiwu's house. This meant that the heart-piercing fiend pattern was deliberately set up by Wang Shiwu. Thinking of this, Qin Shi couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He was truly puzzled. Wang Shiwu was originally such a positive and outstanding young man, how could he fall so easily? Perhaps it was because humans were creatures that were unwilling to be satisfied with their current situation. When money, fame, and power were at their fingertips, they would pursue other things. Just like what countless emperors pursued throughout their lives. Enjoy immortal blessings forever and live as long as the heavens. Qin Shi used his true essence to conceal his figure, at the same time shielding himself from all sounds. Just like a ghost, he followed Wang Shiwu into the villa. The doors and windows of the villa were closed and thick curtains were drawn all around. After Wang Shiwu entered the door, he only turned on the light at the entrance, so this huge villa looked a little gloomy and scary. Wang Shiwu put on his slippers and went straight to the second floor. Because there weren't many furnishings in the room, his footsteps suddenly echoed in this empty room. Tap, tap, tap. The layout of the second floor was similar to the first floor, but there was no kitchen and there was a study. Wang Shiwu didn't seem to like the light, so he just turned on the aisle light in the corridor. Under the dim light, Wang Shiwu's shadow was very long, and it even looked a little hideous when it was reflected on the wall. He seemed to value his study very much, so he specially installed a fingerprint lock on the door. Wang Shiwu stretched out his finger. With a soft beep, the door of the study opened. Qin Shi stood behind Wang Shiwu, quietly watching his every move. Although it was impossible for Wang Shiwu to see through Qin Shi's disguise with his cultivation, he seemed to have noticed something, so he couldn't help but look back. On the dim second floor, there was only an empty living room, a dark corridor, and a few bedrooms with their doors tightly shut. There was nothing strange. Wang Shiwu frowned and walked to the window. After checking that the doors and windows were closed, he came back to the study. Then, he gently pushed the door open and entered. A cold wind suddenly blew out of the study. At the same time, there was a faint moldy smell in the room. It was similar to the smell when clothes were not dried in winter and were directly put into the wardrobe and opened in spring. It wasn't smelly, but it still made people feel a little uncomfortable. Wang Shiwu walked into the study. But he still didn't turn on the light, but walked to the bookshelf in the dark. Just like in a treasure hunting movie, Wang Shiwu actually set up a mechanism behind the bookshelf. He pressed the mechanism and the bookshelf slowly opened like a curtain, revealing the hidden dark room behind it. This was a room about 20 to 30 square meters. In addition to the side where the bookshelf was located, there were shelves similar to bookshelves on the three walls of the dark room. However, there were not books on the shelves, but transparent glass jars one after another. These jars were the same as the jars used to soak white wine in restaurants, but what was soaked in them was not wine, but a newly formed fetus. Seeing such a strange and terrifying scene, Wang Shiwu's face didn't change at all, as if he was used to it. After walking into the dark room, he sat straight on the futon in the center of the dark room. Then Wang Shiwu closed his eyes and prepared to start tonight's cultivation. She stood silently behind Wang Shiwu. Even facing the light, there was still no shadow behind him. It was like a ghost. And it was a ghost that came to claim his life in the night of the seventh reincarnation. She didn't know why he was so angry. After all, with his temperament, even if the sky fell, he shouldn't panic at all. But now, she was infuriated by the arrangement in front of her. If he was still immortal, his temples would probably be throbbing crazily at this moment. In addition to anger, there was more anger. It was too hateful. What was a fetus? To put it simply, it was a child that had already developed, but had not yet been born from the mother's belly. The fetus had not yet been born, so naturally it was not contaminated with the turbid air of the world, so it could also be regarded as the purest vitality condensed from the essence of the mother's body. Why would Wang Shiwu choose such an evil place that didn't even have the spiritual energy of heaven and earth as his cultivation place? Wasn't it because he didn't need to work hard to refine the spiritual energy of heaven and earth into vital essence? As long as he used this evil and bizarre technique, he would be able to extract the energy from one fetus after another. Just like pouring tea, he would be able to pour the energy directly into his dantian, thus saving him the time needed to refine the natural energy of heaven and earth. Chapter 302. In the dark room. The glass jars were neatly arranged on the shelves, one after another, and there were at least 70 to 80 of them. In other words, at least 70 to 80 little lives had been ruthlessly taken away before they could even let out their first cry. Although the yuan qi in the fetus was pure, how old was the child? How much primordial qi could a young body contain? Therefore, although there were only 70 to 80 glass jars in the dark room, the number of innocent victims was definitely more than that. God knows how many lively and lovely children this bastard had killed. This set of evil cultivation method was actually somewhat similar to Sun Wen's 5-element soul cultivation technique, but Sun Wen used living people while Wang Shiwu used fetuses. In Qin Shi's view, even if these fetuses were bought by Wang Shiwu with money, it was an absolutely unforgivable sin. But, although he was angry, Qin Shi did not immediately act out, but quietly wandered around the room. He wanted to see where Wang Shiwu learned these crooked methods from. Sure enough, after Qin Shi wandered around the room, he found that there was something like a secret manual on the table in front of Wang Shiwu. Walking over to take a look, he saw that there were 4 large words written in traditional script. Corpse Infant Soul Transference. Qin Shi roughly glanced at the contents recorded in the secret manual and found that this set of cultivation method was indeed extremely evil, and even went against any cultivation method he knew of on Earth. Although the content of Wang Shiwu's current cultivation method was very superficial, but Qin Shi roughly deduced according to the core of this set of cultivation method, and found that this set of cultivation method was actually self-contained, and was completely feasible in theory. A perfect set of cultivation method that did not require the spiritual qi of heaven and earth, and purely relied on absorbing the yuan qi of others. This also meant that the person who cultivated this set of cultivation method would not be limited by the sparse spiritual qi of earth. As long as there was an endless supply of yuan qi, then he could smoothly break through to the celestial level, condense the golden core and form the yuanying. Then there was a problem. Just who was the one who created such an extremely evil cultivation method? Since he was able to create such a cultivation method, then regardless of whether this person was good or evil, he could definitely be called a genius. Thinking of this, Qin Shi couldn't help but make a guess. Could it be, was this person also from the heavenly gates? But after thinking about it carefully, Qin Shi felt that this guess didn't seem to be too reliable. After all, he'd already fought Bai Hong's group. Although the cultivation method used by Bai Hong's group was very different from the immortal cultivation method that Qin Shi knew, the core of their cultivation was still qi refining. They still had to cultivate to be able to transform the spiritual energy of heaven and earth into their own use. This was the most traditional and also the most reliable way of cultivation. If they were to be compared to the factions of the characters in Wuxia dramas, White Rainbow's group could be called the righteous faction, and the person who created the evil cultivation method must be a big villain. It was impossible for the two to come together. Qin Shi frowned and looked at the contents of the secret book. He then turned to look at Wang Shiwu, who was sitting on the futon and cultivating. At this time, Wang Shiwu seemed to have noticed the strangeness in the room, so he immediately opened his eyes. Qin Shi. The moment he saw Qin Shi's figure, Wang Shiwu's body trembled violently. Obviously he was shocked by the sudden appearance of Qin Shi. Qin Shi. Why are you here? Wang Shiwu stared with his eyes and mouth wide open, looking at Qin Shi with a shocked expression. Probably because he was too shocked, there was even a blank expression on his face. This place was his biggest secret, but now it was unreservedly displayed in front of Qin Shi. How could Wang Shiwu not panic? You followed me? Seeing that Qin Shi didn't speak, a fierce light flashed across Wang Shiwu's face, and the temperament on his body suddenly became somewhat ferocious. Qin Shi stood not far in front of Wang Shiwu, looking at him condescendingly. Wang Shiwu usually wore a pair of gold-rimmed glasses and a tailored suit. He looked completely like a refined and successful person. But now, Wang Shiwu suddenly tore off that layer of disguise and completely showed his true side in front of Qin Shi. Qin Shi didn't speak. Wang Shiwu looked around in bewilderment. When he was sure that there was only Qin Shi here, his face suddenly showed a very strange smile. Very well, since you found out, then don't blame me for being ruthless. After that, Wang Shiwu suddenly jumped up from the futon and slammed his palm on Qin Shi's chest. Wang Shiwu's speed was very fast. The moment he made his move, Wang Shiwu's arms suddenly became like the roots of a tree. His blood vessels protruded, and a layer of dark brown spots and wrinkles appeared on his skin. It looked very strange. Wang Shiwu was Fang Lei's fiancé, and Fang Lei was Qin Ruoying's best friend. Logically speaking, he and Qin Shi were actually very close. What a pity. Wang Shiwu rushed at Qin Shi with a ferocious smile. Just as he was about to hit Qin Shi finally made a move. He suddenly raised his right hand, and like the action of smashing a ball in table tennis, he slammed his palm down heavily. Slap. If Qin Shi's hand was a table tennis racket, then Wang Shiwu's face was obviously a table tennis racket. Wang Shiwu was immediately sent flying with a solid slap on his face. Bang. With a huge muffled sound, Wang Shiwu's body hit the wall heavily, knocking over a lot of glass jars. The glass shards flew in all directions and fell to the ground with a series of pleasant sounds. Who the hell are you? Wang Shiwu covered his face and struggled to get up from the ground. When he looked at Qin Shi again, his eyes were full of shock and disbelief. With his current cultivation, he was basically equivalent to a warrior in the profound mastery of gang state. Why didn't he have a chance to fight back in front of Qin Shi? It was like a 3-year-old child fighting with an adult. His opponent could easily slap him until he couldn't find his bearings. How was this possible? Wang Shiwu stared at Qin Shi in a daze. This friend, who was eating at the same table with him just now, had become so strange. Tell me who taught you these things? Qin Shi looked at Wang Shiwu expressionlessly. Under his gaze, Wang Shiwu suddenly felt like he was being pressed down by a mountain, so heavy that he almost couldn't breathe. Wang Shiwu trembled as he tried to resist the pressure. But at this time, Qin Shi suddenly let out a cold snort. Humph. Qin Shi's voice was very soft, but when it reached Wang Shiwu's ears, it was like a thunderclap. It immediately scattered the pneuma that Wang Shiwu secretly gathered, and even made him kneel down powerlessly on the spot. The huge gap between the two sides seemed to wake Wang Shiwu up. Chapter 303. A strange expression appeared on Qin Shi's face as he looked at Wang Shiwu, who was kneeling on the ground and howling in agony. You turn the page faster than you turn hostile. Don't you think your actions are very low? Hearing this, Wang Shiwu could not help but be stunned. He hurriedly raised his head as if wanting to explain something. However, at this moment, Qin Shi continued, Save you? Then tell me, how should I save you? Qin Shi looked at Wang Shiwu with a cold expression. He really wanted to hear what kind of story he would come up with. Accidentally entered an evil cult organization, and in the end fell deeper and deeper, unable to escape. Now that he finally repents, I only ask that you give him a chance to turn over a new leaf? Isn't this plot a little too old-fashioned? Qin Shi added scenes for Wang Shiwu in his heart, but Wang Shiwu did not seem to have the consciousness to become an actor. When he heard the sarcasm in Qin Shi's tone, he begged bitterly, With your abilities, your status in the Wu Lian must be quite high, right? Qin Shi, with our relationship, even if you don't give face to the monk, give face to the Buddha, give face to Lei Lei, can you let me go today? I promise that as long as I can escape this disaster, I will repay you many times over in the future. After hearing Wang Shiwu's words, Qin Shi did not know whether to laugh or cry. He originally thought that Wang Shiwu would come up with some story to deceive him, but he did not expect that Wang Shiwu did not realize what he was doing at all. The only reason he was begging for mercy was because he was afraid of being caught by the Wu Lian. From the looks of it, he should have joined of his own accord and not been forced by someone. Since Wang Shiwu was so afraid of the Wu Lian, it meant that the Wu Lian should have started investigating them long ago. It was just that they did not find any evidence, so they did not do anything to them. Thinking of this, Qin Shi nodded lightly as if agreeing to Wang Shiwu's request. Seeing this, Wang Shiwu could not help but be overjoyed. He struggled to get up from the ground. But no matter how hard he tried, that mountain-like invisible pressure still pressed him firmly to the ground, and he couldn't stand up no matter what. Don't worry, tell me what's going on first. Who taught you these things? Otherwise, I won't be able to answer to the higher-ups. Seeing that Qin Shi didn't seem to be joking, Wang Shiwu hesitated for a moment, then clenched his teeth and said, "Fine. I'll talk. It's actually like this." After that, Wang Shiwu briefly explained the reason why he learned this kind of evil cultivation method. About half a year ago, not long after his engagement with Fang Lei, Wang Shiwu joined an organization called the Jinli sect under the recommendation of a friend. The way this organization recruited members was very simple, and that was through one-on-one referrals. The recommended person must be under the age of 40 and have a certain social status. Only after the approval of the church's board of directors can they enter the church. In other words, this was a cult organization that took the high-end route. What was different from ordinary cult organizations was that the Jinli sect didn't show too obvious antisocial nature. After joining the sect, one only needed to pay a considerable fee, and the member would be able to obtain a cultivation method that was known as a supreme secret technique. In fact, it was the simplest set of qi cultivation methods. When this member succeeded in qi cultivation and found that his physical fitness had greatly improved, he would naturally be more convinced of the Jinli sect. After that, if the member still wanted to obtain a higher level of cultivation method, he would need to do something for the Jinli sect in exchange for the approval of the board of directors. Only then could he officially become a believer of the Jinli sect. Of course, only after officially becoming a believer of the Jinli sect could he obtain this set of corpse baby soul crossing, which was known as the cult's secret technique. Wang Shiwu's explanation was very simple. After listening for a while, Qin Shi roughly understood how this cult operated. Wasn't this an upgraded version of pyramid schemes, blockchain? The evil cultivation method was originally a shortcut. It could let people taste the benefits in a short time, so it was naturally very tempting. Thinking of this, Qin Shi couldn't help but ask curiously, "You're a believer, right? Then what did you do for the Jinli sect back then?" Hearing this, an obvious unnatural expression flashed across Wang Shiwu's face, but soon he pretended to be casual and said, "I paid 20 million as a membership fee and recommended 3 friends to join the sect. Then I can become a believer." After saying that, Wang Shiwu raised his head and looked at Qin Shi. After seeing that Qin Shi's eyes were still very cold, Wang Shiwu quickly lowered his head again. It was obvious that he was lying. However, Qin Shi didn't seem to have the intention to delve deeper. Instead, he changed the question and asked, "Where is the headquarters of the Jinli sect?" "I don't know about this. The church has a one-to-one referral system. I usually meet the referral at the club we often go to, so I don't have to go to the headquarters." "Don't you need the approval of the steward to become a believer?" "Who's the steward?" "I don't know." Wang Shiwu shook his head and continued, "I haven't seen the steward with my own eyes. We usually have a video call and I have to wear a mask when I talk." After saying that, Wang Shiwu pointed to the golden mask on the table. This time Wang Shiwu wasn't lying. He really hadn't seen the steward, and he really didn't know where the headquarters of the Jinli sect was. Qin Shi frowned and pondered for a while. When he was about to continue asking, Qin Shi suddenly frowned. Because the restriction on Lin Xian's body was triggered. When he left just now, Qin Shi quietly placed a restriction on Lin Xian's body. Now that the restriction was triggered, it meant that someone was trying to get close to Lin Xian. As expected. After only a few seconds, Qin Shi noticed that the self-defense pendant he gave Lin Xian had been activated. Someone was trying to hurt her. When he noticed all this, Qin Shi's figure disappeared from Wang Shiwu's sight almost instantly. Wang Shiwu stared blankly at the spot where Qin Shi was just now. After a long while he struggled to stand up, but it was still in vain. He could only helplessly shout in the dark room, "Qin Shi? Qin Shi? Where did you go? Let me go first." Of course, Qin Shi didn't have time to deal with Wang Shiwu now. When Li Xiaowen was eating just now, there was an evil aura around him. Before he left, he took a deep look at Lin Xian. Therefore, Qin Shi was very vigilant and placed a restriction on Lin Xian. Destroy what you can't get? He didn't expect Li Xiaowen to take this step after all. Shi quickly rushed to Lin Xian's location, only to find that Lin Xian had been moving, and at a very fast speed. Could it be, she's already been abducted? Thinking of this, she couldn't help but change his expression slightly. There were a total of 3 pieces of the self-defense pendant he made. One was on Aunt Zhang, one was on Yin Yin, and the last one was on Lin Xian. No matter what, it was a magic tool that he made personally. Although the materials were crude, it shouldn't be damaged so quickly, right? Chapter 304. Rewind time to half an hour ago. After Lin Xian left in a taxi, Li Xiaowen, who had left early, suddenly appeared out of nowhere and followed Lin Xian all the way back to her neighborhood. However, Li Xiaowen did not follow Lin Xian into the neighborhood. Instead, he called Lin Xian from outside the neighborhood, implying that he wanted to talk to her face to face. He had pursued Lin Xian for many years, and this time he seemed to have finally thought it through, so he wanted to meet with Lin Xian one last time. They could chat as friends and it could be considered as a farewell. From then on he would not disturb her anymore. After hearing Li Xiaowen's heartfelt confession, Lin Xian was silent on the other end of the phone. She held her phone in one hand and pulled open the curtains with the other. In the hazy city at night, the flashing neon lights could not illuminate the deepest corner of her heart. At this moment the scene was similar to what Huang Jingren described in Qi Huai, sitting under the flowers and playing the flute, gazing into the distance through the red walls. As if this star was not last night, for whom the wind and dew stood in the middle of the night. Lingering thoughts are exhausted, turning the heartache and peeling the banana. 3 to 5 years, 3 to 5 months, the pitiful cup of wine has not disappeared. The pitiful cup of wine has not disappeared. The bitterness of the world is no greater than the bitterness of infatuation. It had to be said that this kind of infatuated man's image could easily soften a woman's heart. Therefore, after much consideration, Lin Xian agreed to his request. She then went downstairs to Li Xiaowen's car to have a good talk with him. In reality, the reason why Lin Xian usually gave Li Xiaowen the cold shoulder was not because she really disliked Li Xiaowen, but because she did not want Li Xiaowen to waste too much time on her. Lin Xian was a rational woman, but at the same time she was a kind woman. Because of this, she never gave Li Xiaowen a good look. She only hoped that he would back off in the face of difficulties and not take any chances. After all, after so many years, even if you raised a dog you would still have some feelings for it. Moreover, was that still a human? But it was a pity. Lin Xian's heart already belonged to someone, and her attitude towards relationships was very extreme. She would never allow herself to compromise. As the saying goes, when one's heart is moved, it means that one is heartless. Lin Xian reluctantly got into the car. One had to know that ever since Li Xiaowen officially started pursuing her, Lin Xian had never sat in Li Xiaowen's car again. Therefore, when she sat in Li Xiaowen's car, she clearly felt uncomfortable. Lin Xian felt awkward, but Li Xiaowen was very excited. Perhaps he was afraid of scaring Lin Xian, so Li Xiaowen suppressed his voice and said to Lin Xian in a slightly restrained manner, Xian, it's not like you don't know my feelings for you." Before he finished, Li Xian interrupted. His resolute tone and the emotionless director Li completely widened the gap between the two of them. Lin Xian's attitude was so bad that it seemed to be out of Li Xiaowen's expectations. He was stunned. At this moment he no longer had the attitude of a rich second-generation heir or a big boss of a corporation. He was just a sad loser. Seeing Li Xiaowen at a loss, Lin Xian's heart softened. Therefore, after a soft sigh, Lin Xian said gently, "I'm sorry, I really don't have any feelings for you, so I have to express my attitude clearly in case you misunderstand." "I hope you can understand." Li Xiaowen was silent. The car suddenly became quiet. After a while he asked in a heavy tone, "Then, are we still friends?" Hearing this, Lin Xian hesitated for a moment, then said helplessly, "It better not be." Then Lin Xian was ready to open the door and get out of the car. She and Li Xiaowen were not considered friends. This time she made it clear so that he would completely give up. To be honest, Lin Xian did not want to hurt others like this, but when it came to relationships it would be messy. It was better to be less conflicted and more decisive. While thinking, Lin Xian pulled the car door but realized that the door was locked. Therefore she said to Li Xiaowen, "Please open the door, I should go back." However, Li Xiaowen did not seem to hear her. He held the steering wheel with both hands and lowered his head. She did not know what he was thinking. Seeing this, Lin Xian suddenly felt a little scared, so she said again, "Xiaoli, it's late, I have to go to work tomorrow. Please open the door, I should go back." After saying that, Lin Xian tried to push the car door again, but she couldn't push it open. This car was probably modified, so once it was locked, only the driver could unlock it. Lin Xian had no choice but to turn around and try to persuade Li Xiuwen to open the door. But just as she turned around, Li Xiuwen suddenly started the car. Stepping on the accelerator, the car suddenly rushed out like a horse that had lost control. The huge inertia caused Lin Xian to fall heavily on the back of the seat. After regaining her senses, Lin Xian shouted in panic, "Stop the car! Stop the car! I want to get out! I'm calling the police!" As she shouted, Lin Xian took out her phone to call the police. Seeing this, Li Xiuwen suddenly swung the steering wheel, and the car suddenly drifted on the road. This also caused Lin Xian to lose her balance and the phone in her hand flew out. Lin Xian was completely flustered. She could only hit Li Xiuwen's shoulder and screamed, "Stop the car! Let me out!" "Shut up!" Li Xiuwen glared fiercely at Lin Xian and then sped up again. Accompanied by the loud sound of the engine, the car suddenly rushed out at an extremely fast speed. Lin Xian was frightened by Li Xiuwen's behavior. Out of consideration for her own safety, she did not dare to do anything that might anger him. She could only curl up in the front passenger seat and hold on tightly to the seatbelt. Her careful look made her look especially helpless. Li Xiuwen brought Lin Xian and sped through the city. Not long after, he brought Lin Xian to a church-like building. Then Li Xiuwen violently pulled Lin Xian out of the car, and then dragged her straight to the church. "What are you doing? Let me go." Lin Xian struggled with all her might, but she was a woman who did not weigh more than 100 pounds. How could she win against a young and strong man? Moreover, Li Xiuwen's strength seemed to be exceptionally great. Using only one hand, he was able to easily drag her into the church as if she was a chicken. "Xian Xian, did you know? I once swore." Chapter 305. Let me go. Let me go. Save me. Help. Save me. Lin Xian screamed as she used her nails to scratch at Li Xiuwen's arm. However, Li Xiuwen's arm was like a steel plate, and no matter how hard Lin Xian tried, it was futile. At the same time, because she used too much strength, she broke a lot of her carefully trimmed nails, and her fingertips started to bleed. Lin Xian's screams were very loud, but Li Xiuwen did not care, and dragged her like a sack towards the church. The church's door was not locked, and Li Xiuwen gave it a push, and the door slowly opened. Then he dragged Lin Xian into the church. But the strange thing was, it was night time, but the church that should have been closed a long time ago was brightly lit. The lights shone on the colorful window decorations on both sides, silently giving off a solemn and dignified feeling. Then this solemn atmosphere was broken by Lin Xian's screams. There was no one in the large hall, and Li Xiuwen dragged Lin Xian on the red carpet in the middle, and the commotion they made seemed to have alerted the church staff. Following a series of light footsteps, a figure walked out from the depths of the church. That person was about 40 or 50 years old, dressed as a priest, and had a cross pendant around his neck. He looked like the priest in charge of this church. Lin Xian made a lot of noise, but the priest acted as if he did not hear it. After he appeared from the passage, he went straight to the altar in the middle of the church, and then calmly looked at the pair of young people in front of him. Li Xiuwen dragged Lin Xian to the altar, and finally let go of Lin Xian's arm. Perhaps because she struggled too hard, Lin Xian was now completely exhausted, and so she laid on the carpet on the spot. At this moment, Li Xiuwen lowered his head slightly and said respectfully to the priest standing behind the altar, "Steward Sun, I want this woman to fall in love with me wholeheartedly and never leave me for the rest of her life. Sorry to trouble you." Hearing this, the priest who was addressed as Steward Sun took a deep look at Li Xiuwen, then asked calmly, "Just for a woman? Do you know what price you have to pay? You only have one chance. You'd better think carefully before answering me." After hearing Steward Sun's words, Li Xiuwen hesitated for a moment. But when he looked at Lin Xian, who was lying beside him, he fiercely gritted his teeth and solemnly nodded in response, "I know. I have no regrets. Manager Sun, sorry to trouble you." "Very good, the Heavenly Father has heard your words. Now, it is time for you to listen to the gospel." The priest nodded. Then he raised his right hand and pointed his index finger at Lin Xian. At this moment, Lin Xian was like an injured rabbit. She could only kneel on the ground weakly. She tried her best to distance herself from Li Xiuwen, but at this moment, an invisible force suddenly surrounded her. Ah! Feeling the strange feeling in her body, Lin Xian could not help but cry out in surprise. She wanted to struggle, but the invisible force tightened around her. It was like a cloth wrapped around a mummy. Layer after layer, it wrapped around her until she could not move. Just as Lin Xian was about to be crushed by this force until she could not breathe, the pendant in front of her chest suddenly exploded with an extremely dazzling light. Seeing this, Steward Sun could not help but look at her in astonishment. He softly muttered, "A magical weapon?" Like an eggshell, the light that exploded from the pendant instantly enveloped Lin Xian. Steward Sun carefully looked at the cover that was formed by the light. Suddenly, a look of disdain appeared on his face. A crude piece of work. As soon as he finished speaking, Steward Sun suddenly clenched his right hand tightly. An enormous force instantly surged from all directions and crazily squeezed the light cover. In just a few breaths' time, the inferior Guanyin statue that cost Qinshi 100 yuan was instantly shattered like glass. It was turned into fine powder by this force. With the protective magical weapon losing its effect, Lin Xian instantly became a fish on the chopping board. She could only wait to be slaughtered. Then Steward Sun waved his right hand. Lin Xian's body slowly flew up and landed on the altar in front of him. Lin Xian lay on the altar, unable to move. As she was too scared, she had long turned pale with fright and tears streamed down her face. "Oh, who can save me?" Lin Xian tried her best to cry for help, but her throat seemed to be blocked by something. She could only let out a desperate whimper. At this moment, Steward Sun looked at Li Xiaowen again. He then handed a golden dagger to him. "Come here and drip your blood into the holy water pool. Then let this woman drink the holy water. From today onwards, everything about her belongs to you, including her soul." Hearing this, Li Xiaowen immediately took the dagger. Then he followed Steward Sun's instructions and walked to the side of the holy water pool. He used the dagger to lightly cut his fingertip. When the sharp dagger cut his skin, Li Xiaowen instantly felt a piercing pain. The pain seemed to come from the depths of his soul. He could not help but let out a blood-curdling scream. However, despite the pain, Li Xiaowen did not forget Steward Sun's instructions. He hurriedly extended his finger above the holy water pool. A drop of dark red blood slid from his fingertip and fell directly into the pool below. Then Li Xiaowen picked up the Holy Grail from the table beside him. He used the Holy Grail to scoop a cup of holy water mixed with his blood into the pool. Then he turned around and walked to Lin Xian. Although Lin Xian could not move, she heard their conversation clearly. So, when she saw Li Xiaowen walking to her side with the cup, Lin Xian instantly let out a series of emotional sobs. Bean-sized teardrops kept falling from the corners of her eyes. In a daze she remembered that day again, that dilapidated building that leaked air everywhere, that figure that suddenly appeared, I don't know why. This time Lin Xian really hoped that Qinshi could come in time. Therefore, even if she could not make any sound, she was crazily screaming in her heart. "Qinshi, save me!" Perhaps it was because the Jesus statue on the altar heard her prayer. So, just as Li Xiaowen was about to feed her the holy water with the Holy Grail, the door of the church was suddenly pushed open. It was not right to say that it was pushed open because the two doors were directly sent flying. It was as if they were hit by an ancient battering ram. The two 3-meter-tall heavy doors were knocked off their frames and flew directly into the church. Then they crashed into rows of seats. Chapter 306. Just as the church's door was blown away, Manager Sun frowned deeply. He actually did not notice that someone was approaching the church. How was this possible? It was obvious that the person was not an ordinary person. Out of the intention to test him, Manager Sun took a deep look at the person and said in a deep voice, "Do you know, where is this place?" Although he spoke softly, his voice was exceptionally loud and clear. It was as if the sound had been amplified by a high-powered surround sound system. When Steward Sun's voice reached the entrance of the church, the decibels grew louder and louder. It was like a thunderclap, instantly shattering the windows on both sides of the wall. A simple sentence, but it sounded like the legendary lion's roar technique. But what made Manager Sun feel strange was that although his voice was so loud, the person did not show any expression on his face. Instead, he calmly continued to walk towards the altar. Like a devout believer who came to the church every week, that person stepped on the red carpet and walked over, as if he did not care about Manager Sun at all. At this moment, Li Xiaowen, who was standing next to Lin Xian with the Holy Grail, also placed his attention on this strange intruder. But when he saw the person's face clearly, he could not help but exclaim, "Qinshi." That's right. This intruder who broke the church's door. Wasn't that the Qinshi who had dinner with him just now? After hearing Li Xiaowen's voice, Qin Shi finally stopped and stood about 5 meters away from the altar. He looked at Li Xiaowen with a meaningful gaze, then slowly said, "We are all friends, we could have had a good meal together, but why did you have to court death?" He said, "You all, not you." So, while these words were said to Li Xiaowen, they were also said to Wang Shiwu, who was far away. Qin Shi's words had a deep meaning, but Li Xiaowen did not understand at all, so he immediately asked, "What are you doing here?" Hearing this, Qin Shi laughed as if he heard a joke. "What do you think?" Li Xiaowen stopped talking. After taking a deep look at Qin Shi, he shifted his gaze to the empty door of the church. Obviously, Li Xiaowen also realized that Qin Shi was not a normal person. Hence, Li Xiaowen immediately said to Steward Sun beside him, "Steward Sun, I did not bring this person here. He and I." However, before Li Xiaowen could finish his sentence, Steward Sun suddenly raised his arm and interrupted him. After that, Steward Sun walked out from behind the altar. He stood on the stairs and looked down at Qin Shi. He asked coldly, "Do you know where this is?" "Where?" After hearing Manager Sun's question, Qin Shi smiled disdainfully and replied, "Look at your serious face. Is this some dragon's lair or tiger's den?" At this point, Qin Shi deliberately paused and then asked with a smile, "If you didn't say it, I would have thought that this is a garbage collection center and all kinds of garbage are stuffed in here. How dare you?" Seeing Qin Shi's nonchalant expression, Steward Sun could not help but be furious. He scolded sternly, "Ignorant child, is my universal truth sect a place for you to be presumptuous?" After saying that, Steward Sun suddenly raised his right hand, and a ball of flame suddenly jumped out of his palm. After that, without seeing any action from Steward Sun, the ball of flame suddenly burned fiercely, and then turned into countless lifelike flame crows. They flapped their wings crazily and pounced toward Qin Shi from all directions. Seeing this, a cold smile suddenly appeared on the corner of Qin Shi's mouth. With a wave of his hand, an invisible force suddenly blew away all the fire crows like a hurricane. After seeing Qin Shi's move, Steward Sun's expression changed slightly. He frowned and said, "Celestial? What? Are you scared?" Qin Shi looked at Steward Sun with a mocking gaze. After that, he raised his index finger and said slowly, "I'll give you another chance to attack. Cherish it. I hope you can show me something different." Hearing this, Steward Sun could not help but fly into a rage. "How dare a mere celestial speak so arrogantly? If that's the case, then I'll show you today, what is a god?" As soon as he finished speaking, the black robe on Steward Sun's body suddenly fluttered, and a gloomy and cold aura immediately spread in the main hall. As Li Xiaowen was too close to Steward Sun, he instantly felt as if he had fallen into a 10,000-year-old ice cave. It was so cold that he almost could not breathe. Qin Shi looked at Steward Sun silently. He sensed that there was a surge of power in Steward Sun's body, and this power was being released bit by bit. If there was no accident, then it should be the primordial core that he condensed by using the evil technique. Primordial core, golden core. There was only a difference of one word, but the meaning was completely different. The so-called golden core was the condensation of all the true essence in an immortal cultivator's entire body to a point. After that, it would undergo repeated compression and tempering. Like refining pills, the impurities would be removed and the essence would be extracted. Finally, it would be formed into a ball and stored in the dantian. It sounded very simple, but condensing a golden core was not an easy task. It was like rolling a piece of foil into a small ball. It was very easy. However, after rolling it into a ball, it had to be hammered bit by bit until it was solid. Only after being hammered thousands of times could this piece of foil be turned into a complete and flawless metal ball. And if the number of hammering was not enough, even if this piece of foil had been molded into a small metal ball, there would still be many flaws in it. This was because its structure was not complete, and it was only a superficial appearance. Just as the old saying goes, a 1,000-mile dike would collapse because of an ant's nest. As long as the flaw of the small ball was found, it would naturally be easy to shatter and disintegrate the small ball. Therefore, this kind of flawed golden core was also called the primordial core. Logically speaking, since an immortal cultivator had already formed the primordial core, it was only a matter of time before they condensed it into a golden core. However, because Steward Sun cultivated an evil technique that relied on absorbing the essence of other people's souls to nourish himself, and this technique itself was not a top-notch technique in the long run, the impurities in his body would far exceed that of an ordinary immortal cultivator. Therefore, when he was refining his golden core, he would naturally spend more time than others. However, even if Steward Sun had not truly condensed his golden core, he was still the first existence that Qin Shi had met on Earth that surpassed the celestial being level. At the same time, he was also the first existence that dared to call himself a god in front of Qin Shi. It was really... Chapter 307. Although Steward Sun was dressed as a priest, an extremely evil aura suddenly surged out of his body in his rage. And this was obviously his true face. This Junli sect that used religious beliefs to recruit members was actually more like the heretical demons that often appeared in Wuxia dramas. As long as it was beneficial to them, they would do anything and everything. Therefore, when Steward Sun opened his arms and let out a long howl, his body suddenly emitted a lot of black fog, which looked very strange. After the black fog appeared from Steward Sun's body, it kept changing its shape. It was like thousands of ferocious human faces that were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws as they hovered in midair. What was even more frightening was that these human faces seemed to be alive as they kept letting out ear-piercing screams. In an instant, the originally solemn and sacred church had turned into an incomparably evil place of ghosts. The temperature in the air suddenly dropped, and a gloomy and cold feeling enveloped everyone present. Ghost? Ghost? Perhaps it was because he had not been in the sect for long and had not come into contact with too many core secrets. Even Li Xiaowen was so frightened that he could not help but take a few steps back when he saw such a terrifying scene. In reality, weren't these ghostly shadows floating in the air the innocent lives that Steward Sun had harmed all these years because of his cultivation of evil techniques? Not only did he harm people's lives and steal their souls, but he also bound the souls of innocent people in his body as a means of attack. He did not even let the dead off. This kind of heinous and inhumane cruel behavior was probably only done by an evil cultivator. You're a celestial, right? It just so happens that my 1,000 ghosts devouring soul still lacks a ghost king. I'll leave this position to you. After a violent howl, Steward Sun's body shook violently. Immediately after, the thousands of ghostly shadows were like dark clouds that covered the sun as they suddenly pressed down on Qin Shi. Sunluo Purgatory 100 Ghosts Parade. Demons and monsters, 1,000 ghosts devouring soul. Faced with such a terrifying scene, Qin Shi's mind suddenly thought of something else. When he had just met Ning Zhonghua had asked him to treat his old friend Zhang Jiada. Didn't Zhang Jiada's youngest son, Zhang Hongyuan, specially cultivate an evil technique to torture his father? This evil technique, wasn't it of the same origin as the evil technique that Steward Sun was using now? As it turned out, the Junli sect had started to recruit believers long ago, but they were not as unscrupulous as they were now. The shadow was about to arrive, but Qin Shi was still thinking about some unimportant questions, as if he did not take Steward Sun seriously at all. Manager Sun couldn't help but laugh coldly when he saw this, and then he crossed his arms and prepared to admire Qin Shi's painful appearance when the myriad of ghosts devoured his heart. However, when these Yin spirits rushed in front of Qin Shi, they were like vampires that had suddenly seen sunlight, suddenly letting out a sharp and ear-piercing howl. Immediately after, these ghosts were like the shadows before dawn, disappearing the moment they saw the sunlight. This soul-devouring 10,000 ghosts has lost its effect. Steward Sun's eyes widened as if he couldn't believe what was happening before his eyes. From the beginning to the end, Qin Shi stood on the spot without moving. He didn't even lift his eyelids. However, the thousands of Yin spirits that he had painstakingly collected all these years melted like snow, and almost all of them disappeared in an instant, leaving only a few scattered souls hovering above the dome of the church. There wasn't even a splash and everything returned to normal. What exactly happened? Steward Sun's mind was blank, and he was really stunned by what was happening before his eyes. Boring. Seeing Steward Sun's puzzled look, Qin Shi couldn't help but shake his head slightly, and then he slowly walked toward the altar. The soul-devouring 10,000 ghosts was a soul attack, so it wasn't as gorgeous as ordinary spells, but its lethality wasn't inferior to sword techniques, spells, and so on. However, it was a pity that there was a huge limitation to divine spirit attacks. And that was level suppression. Unless Steward Sun's realm exceeded or was equal to Qin Shi's, he would never be able to hurt Qin Shi with a soul attack. Ants biting an elephant to death? It was obviously impossible. You have a realm but you don't have the strength to match it. Do you know, you don't even have the right to make me draw my sword. As he spoke, Qin Shi stretched out his index and middle fingers, and then, he formed a sword with his fingers and pointed in the air. A green sword gleam suddenly shot out, and it instantly hit Steward Sun's chest. Steward Sun stared at his chest in a daze, and his eyes were filled with disbelief. Qin Shi originally wanted to test Steward Sun's cultivation, but he didn't expect him to be so weak. In terms of combat power, he reckoned that he was no match for Sun Wen. After all, Sun Wen's cultivation was accumulated through his own cultivation bit by bit. How could it be compared to Steward Sun's unorthodox cultivation? Steward Sun was seriously injured, and the restriction that restrained Lin Xian immediately lost its effect. Therefore, after letting out a cry of surprise, Lin Xian suddenly sat up from the altar and threw herself directly into Qin Shi's arms. Qin Shi. Lin Xian lay on the altar. Although she couldn't move, she was conscious, so she saw everything that happened. She always felt that Qin Shi wasn't an ordinary person, and this time it was confirmed. However, this reality was far beyond her imagination. Lin Xian cried loudly in Qin Shi's arms. That weeping pear blossom looked like a child who had been wronged outside and would only cry in front of her parents when she returned home. However, after crying for a while, Lin Xian lay in Qin Shi's arms and murmured softly, "Qin Shi, Qin Shi, Qin Shi." Hearing her mutter his name, Qin Shi could only smile awkwardly. He then gently pushed her away and comforted her softly, "It's okay, I'm here. Don't be afraid." After Qin Shi pushed Lin Xian away, she seemed to have sobered up a lot. Therefore, after looking deeply at Qin Shi with her red eyes, she quickly lowered her head and said softly with a sobbing tone, "Thank you. You saved me again." The atmosphere between the two of them was rather ambiguous, and they simply treated Li Xiaowen and Steward Sun as if they didn't exist. Qin Shi didn't kill Steward Sun directly because he wanted to keep him alive and used this opportunity to understand the Jinli sect. However, Qin Shi didn't expect that, even though Steward Sun was seriously injured, a fierce look flashed across his face before he collapsed. While Lin Xian was talking to Qin Shi, Steward Sun mustered all his strength, took off the cross on his neck, and threw it at the statue of Jesus. The moment the bloody cross hit the statue of Jesus, a strong ray of light suddenly bloomed in the church. Something unexpected happened. Qin Shi couldn't care so much anymore. He could only pull Lin Xian into his arms. Following that, he hugged Lin Xian with his left hand and made a grabbing motion in the air with his right hand. The godly sword Dharma power suddenly appeared in his hand. The reason why he was so vigilant was because there was suddenly a strong wave of true yuan in the church. The strength of the movement. Chapter 308. Holy light bloomed and the gospel was sung. A dazzling door of light that was like a lake appeared out of thin air right in front of the statue of Jesus. The door of light emitted tens of thousands of golden rays. Looking from afar, it looked like sunlight reflected in the water. After the sunlight was refracted by the lake, it began to jump gently along with the ripples on the lake's surface, causing countless golden spots of different sizes to appear on the church's walls and dome. Looking from afar, it was as if countless little elves were dancing on the church's dome. If a devout Christian saw this scene, he would probably be so scared that he would kneel on the ground on the spot and shout that Christ had shown his holiness. Unfortunately, Li Xiaowen and Manager Sun did not believe in Christianity, but in the very mysterious Church of Truth. As the door of light opened, a huge amount of true essence leaked out from the door of light. The so-called leakage originally referred to chemical substances that should not have flowed out or leaked out of the mechanical equipment without anyone noticing, thus causing unnecessary losses. But now, what was leaking out from the door of light was not some chemical substance, but the true essence that was painstakingly refined by immortal cultivators. True essence was obtained by immortal cultivators through cultivation bit by bit, so theoretically speaking, it was impossible for it to leak. It was also because of this that once the true essence leaked out, there was basically only one reason, and that was, when immortal cultivators accidentally went berserk during cultivation, they would no longer be able to control the true essence in their body as they wished. For such a situation, there was a word that could vividly describe it, and that was incontinence. Qin Shi shielded Lin Xian behind him, then carefully observed the movement in the door of light. Ever since the door of light appeared, an extremely fanatical expression appeared on Manager Sun's face. He was clearly seriously injured, but now he was as if nothing had happened. He knelt on the ground with a flushed face, raised his hands and shouted loudly, "Father, show your holiness. Have mercy on us. Purify everything in this world that dares to disobey you." As soon as he finished this strange prayer, Manager Sun's face suddenly flushed red. He looked extremely like a religious fanatic who was drunk. However, just as Manager Sun was extremely excited, a red light suddenly shot out from the door of light, directly hitting Manager Sun's glabella. Then, as if he had been electrocuted, his whole body began to tremble violently, and he couldn't help but let out a painful howl. Ah! It hurts. The wailing stopped abruptly. After that, Steward Sun's appearance aged at a speed visible to the naked eye. His head of black hair looked as if it had been painted with spray paint, turning snow white in an instant. In the blink of an eye, Steward Sun had turned into an old man with a head full of white hair and a withered face. What's going on? What did I do? Steward Sun's voice was hoarse as he stared at his arm, dumbfounded. His arm, like an eggplant that had lost its moisture, it was full of wrinkles and shriveled, looking particularly horrifying. Perhaps it was because he was unable to accept everything before his eyes. Steward Sun once again let out a mournful wail. But this wail didn't last long. It was as if Steward Sun's neck was suddenly choked by someone. He instantly lost his voice and could only lie paralyzed on the ground, twitching weakly. But after twitching a few times, Steward Sun lay on the ground, completely dead. Looking at the dehydrated corpse in front of him, Li Xiuwen was stunned. But when he finally came back to his senses, put down the Holy Grail, and was about to escape this godforsaken place, a black shadow suddenly appeared in the light door. It was a person whose entire body was shrouded in a black cloak. That person only revealed half of his face. But just based on this half of his face, it was enough to tell that he should be an old man. The old man walked out of the light door, then asked such a question in a hoarse voice. Who alarmed me? After saying that, he slowly removed the cloak, revealing his true appearance. This was an old man whose eyebrows were stained with silver frost. His weather-beaten face was engraved with the traces of time. Although his pair of brown eyes were deep in his eye sockets, the gaze in them was very calm. He looked exceptionally kind and amiable, just like the old grandpa next door who lay in the district's garden and basked in the sun every day. The old man calmly asked the question, but no one answered him. After all, the only person who knew who he was, Steward Sun, was now lying on the ground as a dried corpse. In reality, the light door was a teleportation array. The key to activate the array was the cross hanging in front of Steward Sun's chest, but the energy required to activate the array required all of his essence and blood. Steward Sun activated the array excitedly. But what he definitely didn't expect was that when the array was activated, it would take his life, and even his soul was not spared. His soul was destroyed. Death wasn't scary. What was scary was not even knowing how one died. After taking a deep look at the light door, She couldn't help but feel sad for Steward Sun. Such a loyal subordinate was abandoned just like that. Just from this point alone, the old man in front of him was really a qualified evil cultivator. She held the divine sword Dharma idol in his hand and kept sizing up the old man in front of him. Lin Xian, on the other hand, carefully hid behind him. Because her line of sight was blocked by the altar, she didn't know that Steward Sun was now a dried corpse. So, after hearing the old man's voice, Lin Xian curiously poked her head out and quietly sized him up. The old man was also sizing up Qin. When he saw the divine sword Dharma idol in Qin's hand, a glimmer of light flashed in his deep eye sockets. Then he set his gaze on Lin Xian. Lin Xian didn't understand the situation, so she tilted her head and looked at the old man in front of her blankly. However, just this one look, it was as if some mechanism had been triggered, causing the old man to suddenly explode. Like a venomous snake that had been hibernating for a long time, he directly pounced in the direction of his prey. Before Lin Xian could react, the old man had already rushed in front of her. Because the distance was too close, Lin Xian could even clearly see the color spots on the old man's face, so she was so frightened that she couldn't help but cry out. Seeing this, the old man couldn't help but laugh out loud. I didn't expect that I would actually find such a high-quality furnace here today. Little girl, you're in luck. After saying that, the old man stretched out his withered arm, wanting to directly pull Lin Xian out from behind Qin. However, just as he stretched out his arm, a cold voice suddenly rang in his ears. Get lost. As soon as the voice fell. Chapter 309. A cold light flashed. The old man suddenly attacked, but Qin's reaction was not slow in the slightest. This sword was like a silver hook. After drawing a beautiful arc in the air, it directly cut the old man's arm. The tip of the sword entered the flesh and suddenly there was a tearing sound. Immediately after, the old man's arm fell from his body very smoothly, as if it had been cut by a laser. Lin Xian was stunned by what happened in front of her eyes. She hid behind Qin, maintaining her previous posture. After seeing the long sword in Qin's hand cut the old man's arm, her mind suddenly went blank. She could not help but open her small mouth, her face full of shock. That dazed look, it gave people a silly and cute feeling. Lin Xian was so frightened that she could not speak. Her eyes were fixed on the severed arm falling from the air. However, the moment the severed arm fell to the ground, it suddenly turned into a cloud of black smoke and dissipated. It looked like a piece of dried straw paper that had been burned to ashes. When the wind blew, it immediately disappeared without a trace. Qin Shi. Lin Xian's eyes widened. Before she could finish her words, she found that her body was flying back uncontrollably. Stay there, don't move. After using his essential essence to send Lin Xian to a safe place, Qin Shi did not forget to remind her. Then, holding the long sword in his hand, he directly attacked the old man. Lin Xian was just an ordinary person, so the scene she saw was completely different from what Qin Shi saw. In fact, in Qin Shi's eyes, the old man's skin hidden under the cloak had already fallen off. Most of his muscles had also rotted away, revealing sections of white bones. What kind of person was this? It was simply an old rotten corpse that had crawled out of the grave. If it was just a skeleton, it would be fine. After all, Qin Shi had lived for 500 years and had seen all kinds of strange things. Naturally, he would not take a living dead person to heart. The reason why he was so cautious was mainly because the skeleton in front of him was not simple. From the moment the old man walked out of the light door, Qin Shi sensed a huge amount of essential essence leaking from the old man's body. But a little strange was, although the amount of essential essence was huge, it gave people a turbid and filthy feeling. If Qin Shi's essential essence was as clear as a lake, then the old man's essential essence was like oil on one side and turbid on the other. It was really strange. And because of the essential essence leaking from the old man's body in Qin Shi's eyes, the old man was more like a charcoal that walked out of a fire, his whole body emitting thick billowing smoke. Not long after, the black smoke emitted from the old man's body filled the entire church. In addition, during the confrontation with the old man, Qin Shi also focused on the light door behind him. This light door was somewhat similar to the heavenly gate, but it could not be compared to the heavenly gate. After all, the heavenly gate required the support of a huge amount of spiritual energy to open, but this light door in front of him only needed Manager Sun, a pseudo-core stage living sacrifice. If it was another world behind the heavenly gate, then behind the light door was obviously just an illegally expanded basement. There was a fundamental difference between the two. And this kind of illegally built basement was actually a small world or a small paradise that was opened up in the void after immortal cultivators comprehended the true meaning of the word void. What was void? This was a very abstract concept. Qin Shi was still at the soul formation stage, so naturally he could not understand the true meaning of it. The so-called insightful void was, to see the small and see the big picture, to see through the void. My heart's desire, no matter how vast the world is, it is only an inch. The insightful void was an existence above the soul formation stage. Even if it was not as unattainable as the immortal emperor, it was at least a supreme existence and could be considered to be at the top of the food chain. Therefore, the light door in front of him obviously could not have been opened up by this old man who had one foot in the grave. If Qin Shi guessed correctly, this small paradise should be an existence similar to the Temple of Time, which was left behind by the ancient immortal cultivators before they left the earth. The old man was just a dove that took over the magpie's nest. If that was the case, then this ghastly old man in front of him, what kind of existence was he? Although Qin Shi had a lot of questions in his mind, his hands did not stop moving at all. After cutting off the old man's arm, Qin Shi immediately turned the sword and pointed it at the old man's chest. The godly sword Dharma idol drew a beautiful arc in the air. The sword light was cold and piercing to the bone. Like a meteor streaking across the sky, it drew a bright silver line in the pitch-black night. Then, the godly sword Dharma idol sank into the old man's chest and directly pierced through him. From the beginning to the end, the old man did not make any movements to fight back. Even when his arm was chopped off, he didn't make a sound. Seeing this, Qin Shi could not help but raise his eyebrows as if he had realized something. So he immediately let go of the long sword in his hand and suddenly put his hands together in front of his chest, ready to make a gesture. However, just as Qin Shi was making the gesture, the old man suddenly let out a burst of wild laughter. Immediately after, his body suddenly turned from solid to illusory, as if he had been snapped by Thanos. In an instant, he turned into thousands of powder and disappeared in front of Qin Shi's eyes. Qin Shi quickly looked up, only to see black smoke billowing above the church, like the sky before a shower, as if it would collapse at any time. At this time, the old man's voice suddenly sounded from all directions of the church. "Little kid, you're a bit interesting. Come on, let this old man weigh how much weight you have." As soon as the voice fell, the black smoke that was originally floating above the church slowly flowed. It was unknown what method the old man used, but the billowing black smoke suddenly turned into a solid substance, and then it turned into a giant python that was dozens of meters long out of thin air. The giant python formed by the black smoke coiled into a ball in the air, and its huge body almost covered the entire dome. Its head was in the shape of an inverted triangle. From the moment it appeared, the giant python stuck out its head, spat out its snake tongue, and stared at Qin with its pair of golden vertical pupils. A suffocating sense of oppression gradually spread in the church. Lin Xian stared at the giant python that suddenly appeared above the church, stunned. When she saw the palm-sized scales on the giant python's body, she was so scared that her eyes rolled back and she fainted directly. Lin Xian's fainting attracted Qin attention. However, the moment he was distracted, the giant python was like a long arrow that was shot out from a fully drawn bow, opening its bloody mouth and directly pouncing towards Qin position. Fortunately, Qin reaction was extremely fast. Pretending to be mysterious, accompanied by an angry shout, Qin suddenly separated his hands, and 2 rays of golden light suddenly bloomed from his palms. When the giant python was about to bite him, Qin was like a llama holding 2 large symbols in his hands, and suddenly slapped out with both palms, ruthlessly hitting the giant python's head. The giant python was formed by the black smoke, and the black smoke was the true yuan that leaked from the old man's body. Therefore this was actually a contest of true yuan. The true yuan in Qin body was clear and pure, but the true yuan in the old man's body was filthy and turbid. When the two came into contact, it was like throwing metallic sodium into water, and immediately caused a violent explosion, the 8-leaf seal. Chapter 310. The old man in front of him was very strange. Even with Qin experience, he did not know what kind of cultivation method the old man was cultivating. Naturally, he could not determine the old man's exact strength. The only thing he could be sure of was, the old man had accumulated too much true origin in his body. It was so much that it was unbelievable. However, at the same time, because this huge amount of true origin was too turbid, the old man was unable to control the true origin in his body as he wished. Hence, after much consideration, Qin finally put down the long sword in his hand and decided to meet the giant python head-on. He wanted to use this to determine the old man's true strength. The Great Vajra Wheel Seal was not the most lethal move among the 8-leaf seals, but it was the most powerful one. If one were to compare the Great Vajra Wheel Seal with the most lethal move, the Heaven-Flipping Seal, it would be like the difference between a mace and a longsword. Hence, the moment Qin palms landed on the giant python's head, the giant python was like a train that had crashed into a wall. Its huge body immediately froze in mid-air. At the same time, with Qin position as the center of the circle, an invisible shockwave suddenly erupted. Wherever the shockwave went, the tables, chairs, doors, windows, and even the steel bars in the walls of the church were all reduced to dust. Dust flew everywhere and smoke rose into the air. In the blink of an eye, the solemn church had been completely reduced to ruins. Just the shockwave from the collision alone was so powerful, one could only imagine how powerful this move was. The giant python let out a loud hiss. Then, its body suddenly cracked inch by inch as if it was made of glass and gradually fell apart. In the end, the giant python turned into a plume of black smoke and slowly dissipated in the sky above the church. However, although the giant python had disappeared, the black smoke that enveloped the church showed no signs of dissipating. Seeing this, Qin face couldn't help but reveal a cold smile. After this head-on battle, he had more or less figured out the old man's strength. Hence, Qin lightly shook his wrist and reached out with his right hand. The divine sword avatar appeared in his hand again. At this moment, the old man's voice suddenly rang out from the black smoke. "Who are you?" He spoke very slowly, and there was even a hint of seriousness in his tone. It was obvious that he had finally realized that the young man before him was no saint. "You wouldn't know him even if I told you." Qin brandished the sword in his hand, then looked at the black smoke with a mocking expression and asked, "What's wrong? Are you afraid? How dare you?" The old man flew into a rage. His voice was like a thunderclap echoing in the black smoke. "Ignorant brat, you don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Do you know that even Divine General Tiandu wouldn't dare to be so impudent in front of this old man?" "Divine General?" Hearing this, Qin seemed to have heard a joke, and a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "I've already killed a few of them." After saying that, Qin suddenly flew up and the divine sword Dharma power in his hand suddenly exploded with a dazzling light. The reason why Qin chose to attack at this time was that he had thoroughly understood the old man's background. If he guessed correctly, the strange soul-faring corpse infant should have been created by this old man. Perhaps it was because of the lack of inheritance, so when the old man relied on this evil technique to form a fake golden core, he had completely embarked on a path of no return. One had to admit that this old man was quite impressive. He didn't even have a real golden core, but he had already begun to explore the method of forming yuanying. What to do if there was no path? Then he had to open up a new path. By relying on constantly stealing other people's souls and essence to strengthen himself, the old man had actually opened up a path that was completely different from others. If one followed the conventional path of cultivation, then after repeatedly refining the golden core until it was pure and ethereal, one could use this golden core as a foundation to form yuanying. If the golden core was compared to a seed, then yuanying was obviously the fruit of the seed after it sprouted and bloomed. Therefore, without a golden core, it was naturally impossible to form yuanying. But in this world there were always exceptions. Perhaps it was because of his rich imagination. When the old man realized that he couldn't break through to yuanying, he thought of a method that Qin had never heard of before. That was, using his own physical body as a foundation, he could turn his entire being into something similar to yuanying. One had to know that yuanying was just a form of energy. Turning himself into a yuanying, wouldn't he have to turn himself into a ghost? Half human, half ghost? And this was the real reason why Qin couldn't hurt the old man. After all, in this sky full of black smoke, every wisp, it was all his fault. He didn't even have a body, so naturally he wouldn't be hurt. Therefore, if Qin really wanted to kill the old man, he had to completely destroy this black smoke, not leaving a single wisp behind. Otherwise, the old man would sooner or later use the method of plundering to return him to his peak. Getting rid of evil for the people was a great thing. As an outstanding young man in the new era, Qin naturally killed every single one of these scourges he saw as a way to accumulate good karma. Thus, after understanding the old man's background, Qin flew into the sky like a sharp sword. Then he held the godly sword Dharma idol in his hand and waved it in the air. Suddenly, 7 identical long swords appeared beside him. Every single one of them was the same as the godly sword Dharma idol in his hand. Although the old man didn't know what Qin was going to do, he knew that it wasn't simple just by looking at his posture. Thus, before Qin launched his attack, the black smoke in the air surged violently. The black smoke gathered in one place and in the blink of an eye, it actually turned back into a giant python with 3 heads. It coiled in the air and madly flicked its tongue at Qin. The 7 long swords hung in the air. The 3-headed giant python raised its heads high, as if it could pounce on Qin at any time. At this moment, Qin suddenly waved the long sword in his hand, the tip of the sword pointing directly at the ruins of the church. The 7 long swords immediately seemed to have received an order, turning into 7 streams of light and shooting towards the ground. The 3-headed giant python thought that the swords were going to shoot at it, so it let out an earth-shattering hiss. However, what the old man didn't expect was that the long sword's target wasn't it at all. After the 7 long swords shot into the ruins of the church, they suddenly shot out 7 towering beams of light like searchlights that were electrified. The 7 beams of light were slanted, converging on the long sword in Qin's hand. The old man sensed that danger was approaching, so he raised the 3 ferocious snake heads and pounced directly at Qin's position. But it was a pity, it was too late. Qin shouted angrily, "Formation rise!" A conical light shield that covered the entire church slowly rose in the night sky. Since this old thief was neither a human nor a ghost, and could transform into thousands of bodies, Qin could only cast an inescapable net and take him down in one fell swoop. Heavenly Slaying Formation. Chapter 311. The formation was complete. Under the dark night sky, the golden light shield was particularly eye-catching. Fortunately, this place was relatively remote and there were no high-rise buildings nearby. Otherwise, Qin would probably be able to see his great achievements on various short video apps tomorrow. The light shield was like an inescapable net, firmly trapping the 3-headed python that the old man had transformed into. The python continuously used its huge body to hit the light shield. However, the light shield seemed to be like a red-hot steel plate. As soon as the python's body touched the light shield, it immediately let out a soft bang sound. Following that, its muscles and scales turned into a wisp of black smoke and dissipated. After a few fruitless attempts, the python could only coil in the air, raising its 3 heads and continuously sticking out its scarlet tongue at Qin. A trapped beast in a desperate situation. Even if it could not escape, its ferocious and terrifying appearance still made people feel fear from the bottom of their hearts. The old man was in danger, and Qin's situation was actually not much better than his. This old monster's battle strength was not very high, but his vitality was extremely tenacious. Because the old man had turned himself into a soul, he could split into thousands of bodies and every wisp of black smoke was him. If Qin missed a wisp of black smoke, then the old man could use this wisp of black smoke to escape, and then continue to devour others. He believed that as long as his lifespan was not up, there would be a day when the vital essence in his body would accumulate to the point where it could not be contained and could only leak out from his body. Therefore, Qin decided to take the risk and use himself as the eye of the formation, multitasking 7 things at once, using the 7 divine swords to replace the formation door, thus trapping the old man in the net. This was actually a very risky action. It was like a python wanting to devour another python of similar size. Although the old man's realm was not as high as his, the vital essence in his body was more than Qin's. Once Qin swallowed the old man into his stomach, as long as the old man broke through the formation, then he would definitely suffer from the backlash. Therefore, Qin immediately activated the formation, and before the old man regained his senses, he had to end the battle quickly. He saw that a flame floated up. It blossomed from the void and cascaded down like a world-cleansing red lotus. Although the flame was small, when it fell on the 3-headed giant python, it was like a spark falling on a gas station, instantly setting off a huge fire. The fire was as quick as lightning, spreading along the python's body. In the blink of an eye, the 3-headed giant python was already on fire. It could only twist its body and madly roll and dance in the sea of fire. Then the 3-headed python turned into a cloud of smoke and dissipated in the sea of fire. The giant python had disappeared, but there was still a lot of black smoke gathered below. Thus, the flames continued to spread downwards. The flames swept over and the black smoke couldn't retreat in time. However, due to the limitations of the light barrier, the places where the black smoke could hide became smaller and smaller. Soon the flames caught up to it. When the flames came into contact with the black smoke, it was like a raging fire coming into contact with gasoline, exploding violently. In an instant, sparks flew everywhere and red light filled the sky. The flames filled the light shield, and the light illuminated more than half of the sky, so that a large cloud of fire appeared in the sky above Jianghu city. The black smoke turned into a black hurricane, crazily colliding with the light shield. The fire slowly burned from the sky to the ground, not leaving a single gap. There was nowhere to run. No, the old man's desperate voice sounded in the light shield. When the raging fire filled the light shield, the remaining wisp of black smoke could only be completely swept away by the fire. Because this old man's life was too tenacious, Qin let the fire burn for a full 5 minutes before he finally dispersed his qi and let everything return to normal. After the fire, the church had long been reduced to nothing. In the burnt ruins, Lin Xian lay on the ground, safe and sound. Qin came to Lin Xian's side, and just as he was thinking about whether to wake her up, a wisp of black smoke quietly emerged from the crack in the ground. Because the wisp of black smoke was too weak, even Qin didn't notice it. Until this wisp of black smoke floated in front of Li Xiaowen, and directly went into his nostrils. Only then did Qin finally notice the difference in Li Xiaowen's body. Perhaps because his mental state was better than Lin Xian, Li Xiaowen was paralyzed on the ground, and saw the entire process of the battle between the old man and Qin. He stared blankly at Qin, his eyes were empty as if he had lost his soul, and his mind was blank. Li Xiaowen was in a daze. Until the wisp of black smoke went into his nostrils, Li Xiaowen smelled something foul and couldn't help but sniff. This sniff was terrible. Li Xiaowen felt dizzy on the spot. Immediately after, there was a sharp pain in his head. That pain seemed to come from the depths of his soul, and he couldn't help but cry out in pain. Qin turned his head to look, and saw Li Xiaowen rolling on the ground in pain. "It hurts." "Qin, save me." Li Xiaowen's voice was hoarse and he let out a barely discernible cry for help. Seeing this, Qin shook his head slightly as if he didn't see anything and calmly retracted his gaze. The evils we bring upon ourselves are the hardest to bear. With that, Qin used his inner yuan to lift Lin Xian, and flew straight into the pitch-black night sky with her. From the perspective of an immortal cultivator, even if the physical body died, the soul would still be there. As long as the soul didn't disappear, it wasn't considered a true death. Especially after an immortal cultivator condensed Yuanying, even if the physical body was damaged and various functions died, they could still let the Yuanying out of the body, and thus maintain the state of the soul. Yuanying contained the essence of an immortal cultivator, and other than the cultivation, it also contained the immortal cultivator's 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls. Thus, as long as the Yuanying didn't disappear, then theoretically speaking, an immortal cultivator wouldn't die. But unfortunately, Yuanying couldn't be separated from the physical body for too long. The heavenly Tao was orderly, and this was the law of heaven and earth that an immortal cultivator couldn't violate. Once the Yuanying left the body, as long as it didn't return to the body after a certain time limit, then no matter how powerful the immortal cultivator was, he would silently perish under the influence of the heavenly Tao, without leaving a trace. Because of this restriction, even though the old man was half human and half ghost, he still didn't abandon his rotting physical body. Thus, if the physical body died unexpectedly, then the immortal cultivator had to find a new body before the Yuanying disappeared. This was also known as possession. Possessing another person's body to maintain one's own life. Fortunately, this kind of behavior would be restricted by the heavenly Tao. An immortal cultivator could only possess another body once in their lifetime, and if they forcefully attempted a second time, they would only die tragically. At the same time, the side effects of possessing another person's body were huge. If an immortal cultivator was compared to a car, then their physical body would be the outer shell of the car, and the Yuanying would be the engine. The old man used to own a Lamborghini, but because of a car accident, the body of the car was smashed into scrap metal, so he could only take out the engine and find a new body. If he could find a Lamborghini of the same model and install his engine, then he would naturally be able to unleash 100% of its power. But the problem was, everyone was a Lamborghini, so why would he let someone else possess his body? If he couldn't find a Lamborghini of the same model, for example, if he installed the Lamborghini's engine on a Wuling Hongguang, even if the car could run, it would definitely not be able to unleash its original power. It might even cause irreversible damage to the engine because the various parts didn't match. Thus, unless they were at the end of their rope, immortal cultivators wouldn't choose to possess another person's body. The old man's injuries were too severe and he had no other choice, so he chose Li Xiuwen. If it was in the past, Qin Shi would definitely save Li Xiuwen for old time's sake. But his actions today had angered Qin Shi, so naturally, Qin Shi couldn't help him. Possession was a life and death game in itself. The strong would live and the weak would die. The old man was only left with a remnant soul, and Li Xiuwen wasn't an ordinary person without any cultivation. Since they were on par, then let them fight it out. Anyway, no matter who survived in the end, that body wouldn't be able to hold on for long. Qin Shi left. Li Xiuwen lay on the ground, struggling in pain. At this moment, a series of urgent sirens suddenly sounded under the dark night sky. More than 10 A6 cars surrounded the ruins of the church. Chapter 312. By the time Lin Xian woke up, it was already 2 o'clock in the morning. Lin Xian covered her head and looked around before realizing that she was already home. Qin Shi. After subconsciously calling out this name, Lin Xian quickly sat up from the sofa. Immediately after, an indescribable feeling welled up in her heart. Could it be? Is he a superhero hidden in human society? Superman? Batman? An otherworldly expert who vanquished demons and defended the Tao, who acted in a chivalrous and righteous manner but did not leave his name behind. Lin Xian saw too many things tonight that were beyond her imagination, so even after waking up, she still felt like she was living in a dream. For a moment she couldn't tell if this was reality or a dream. Just as Lin Xian was sitting on the sofa thinking, Qin Shi suddenly walked out of the kitchen with a bowl of porridge. You're awake? You were frightened just now, so I made you a bowl of walnut porridge. It has the effect of calming the mind and nourishing the brain. Try it? While speaking, Qin Shi handed the bowl to Lin Xian. After Lin Xian took the bowl in a daze, Qin Shi smiled and said, "There's more in the pot, you just need to heat it up tomorrow morning." Thank you. The atmosphere in the room was a little strange, which also made Qin Shi feel a little uncomfortable. Looking at Lin Xian's blank expression, Qin Shi didn't know what to say now. So after thinking about it, he was ready to leave. Well, even if you're fine, you should rest well, I should go back. Qin Shi had already reported the situation to Qin Ruoying, and Qin Ruoying wanted him to wait until Lin Xian woke up before leaving. After all, what happened tonight was too strange. If Lin Xian woke up without a shadow by her side, she would probably be very scared, so Qin Ruoying told Qin Shi to wait until Lin Xian woke up before leaving. Now that she was awake and the porridge was cooked, Qin Shi naturally had to go home to report. "All right, the amulet from before was broken, so I made you a new one. You should wear it, it'll protect you." After that, Qin Shi smiled and winked at her. "I'm going, call me if you need anything." Qin Shi left. After the soft sound of the door closing, Lin Xian was like a robot that had been powered up. She suddenly jumped up from the sofa. "Qin Shi, wait!" Lin Xian quickly chased after him. But when she walked out of the door, there was already no one in the hallway. Looking at the empty hallway, Lin Xian suddenly had a dazed expression on her face. Just like Mrs. Xianglin who had lost her soul, she walked back into the house in a daze. When she saw the necklace on the coffee table, Lin Xian's face lit up again. This was a new style necklace. Although she didn't know what material it was made of, it looked very good. At least it was much better than the inferior Guanyin statue she used to wear. Lin Xian put the necklace on her neck, then carefully touched the pendant on the necklace with her hands. The pendant's design was very delicate. It looked like Cartier's latest design, but the craftsmanship seemed to be more detailed than the original. She kept playing with the pendant like this, until a long time later. She seemed to have thought of something happy, and a faint smile suddenly appeared on her face. But there was an indescribable feeling in that smile. As the saying goes, 9 out of 10 things in life don't go your way, but you can't tell anyone. Birth, old age, illness and death, love, hate and separation, it's all just like this. When Qin Shi returned home, Nian was already asleep, and Qin Ruoying was sitting on the sofa cultivating alone. At this moment, their family was no different from thousands of ordinary families. The husband worked overtime and came home late, while the wife waited silently at home. Because Qin Shi walked silently, it wasn't until he sat next to Qin Ruoying that Qin Ruoying finally noticed his arrival. Qin Ruoying opened her eyes. When she saw Qin Shi's smiling face, she couldn't help but smile. "You're back? How's Xian?" "She looks okay, she shouldn't be too shocked. I think she'll be able to digest what she saw tonight." "Okay, then I'll call her tomorrow. If she's scared, I'll accompany her." "Okay." The two exchanged a few simple words, then Qin Shi leaned forward and kissed Qin Ruoying on the forehead before saying, "I'll go see Nian." "Go." Qin Shi got up and went to the bedroom. As soon as he opened the door, he saw the little thing lying on the bed with her limbs spread out. Recently, the temperature had gradually risen, probably because of the heat, so in addition to kicking the quilt away, this little girl also unconsciously lifted the hem of her clothes, revealing half of her stomach. Looking at her white little belly, Qin Shi couldn't help but smile. This naughty egg, she doesn't even sleep well. After adjusting the little girl's sleeping position, Qin Shi gently covered her with the cold quilt. This old house in Zhonghai didn't have air conditioning, so he gently snapped his fingers. As the true essence gushed out, a faint coolness suddenly appeared in the room. Blowing the air conditioner and covering the quilt in summer was a great joy in life, so this little girl's breathing suddenly became much more relaxed. Qin Shi sat on the edge of the bed, silently looking at her cute little face. After a while, Qin Ruoying quietly came to the bedroom. "She, you see it's already 2 o'clock, how about, we don't go today?" "Huh?" Hearing this, Qin Shi immediately took Qin Ruoying's hand and gently pulled her to his side. "Okay, I'll listen to you. Tonight, we'll stay at home and not go anywhere," the couple whispered to each other by the bed. The place they were talking about was actually the Temple of Time in Karakoram Kunlun. Since Qin Shi got the soul crystal, he would take Qin Ruoying to the Temple of Time every night to cultivate. The 8 times difference naturally made Qin Ruoying's realm progress by leaps and bounds. But at the same time, it also made them spend less time with Nian, even if it was only when Nian was sleeping. Therefore, after deciding not to cultivate tonight, the couple each lay on one side, sandwiching the little guy in the middle. And because the bed was not too big, the couple could only lean against the bed when sleeping, leaving enough space for the little guy to play around. After all, blood was thicker than water. Even if this thing was immersed in sleep, she seemed to be able to sense that her parents were beside her. Therefore, this little thing would turn over from time to time. For a while, she would put her legs on Qin Shi's body, and for a while she would turn over and put her hands on Qin Ruoying's body. Who knew how many times she had tossed back and forth in the night? On a spring night, the pale moon covered the sky, graceful and graceful. Every time a breeze swept through the treetops, it would bring a melodious and soothing rustling sound. It was indeed a good night to sleep. When Qin noticed that Qin Ruoying had also fallen asleep, he was ready to empty his mind and let himself have a good sleep. But at this time he suddenly thought of someone. It was Wang Shiwu, who was still pressed on the ground by him and couldn't get up. Qin raised his head and glanced at the little guy lying on his stomach, sleeping soundly. Then, as if he had made a decision, he gently snapped his fingers. When he left just now, he had already set up a restriction in Wang Shiwu's body. So now Qin only needed to move his mind to trigger the restriction, causing the qi in Wang Shiwu's body to reverse, his vitality to go out of control, and foul qi to rush to his head. Then his fate was obviously. Chapter 313. When the sun broke through the sky, a new day began. Perhaps it was because of the light rain last night. As soon as Qin Ruoying opened the window, a fragrance mixed with the smell of earth came from outside the house. The warm sunlight sprinkled into the room through the window, and the bright and warm feeling instantly made people feel much better. After a night of charging, the little fellow's sweet voice echoed in the house again. "Papa, I want to eat 8 treasure porridge. And shrimp dumplings. Shrimp dumplings. Mama, where's the remote control? I want to watch cartoons." Breakfast was not ready yet, so the naughty little fellow jumped back and forth in the house in slippers. No one knew why she was so happy today. Her little face was as red as a ripe apple, and she looked as if she had been injected with stimulants. Qin Ruoying went to the balcony to collect the clothes, and the little fellow immediately followed her out. Then she tiptoed and leaned on the railing, looking up to see the sun in the sky. What she saw was terrible. The dazzling sunlight immediately made her cover her eyes, and she had to cry "Mama," uncomfortably. "Silly child," Qin Ruoying smiled and shook her head. She hurriedly squatted beside her and whispered a few words of comfort. "Nian, come on, it's time to eat." She came out of the kitchen with a plate, just in time to see Qin Ruoying whispering to the little fellow on the balcony. The warm sunlight sprinkled on the mother and daughter, as if they were wearing a gauze. It was a very beautiful and warm scene. At this moment time seemed to have stopped. She looked at them silently, and a warm feeling suddenly surged in his heart. It was worth it. He had no regrets in his life. After breakfast, the couple accompanied the little fellow at home to read poems of the Tang and Song dynasties. She did not want the little fellow to spend all her leisure time watching cartoons, so he racked his brains to find something else for her to do. He wanted her to like it, and at the same time it was a very healthy way of leisure. Didn't the little fellow cry to ride a shared bike before? Cycling is not bad. Thinking of this, Qin's eyes lit up. In fact, children of Nian's age should be starting to learn how to ride a bicycle. It was just that they were riding a children's bicycle with 2 balance wheels. Therefore, Qin wondered if he should buy a children's bicycle for Nian and take her to the park to learn how to ride it today. Qin quietly mentioned his idea to Qin Ruoying, but before Qin Ruoying could reply, the little guy who had been eavesdropping immediately jumped up from the cushion and shouted excitedly, "Cycling is good. I want to ride a bike. Let's go for a ride. Papa, let's go." With that, she jumped off the sofa and dragged Qin out of the door. As long as it was something that he liked, this little guy's ears were as sensitive as a radar. But if he called her when she was watching cartoons or when she was angry, no matter how many times Qin said it, this little thing would pretend not to hear it. Qin carried her back to the sofa, pinched the tip of her nose with his hand and said with a serious face, "You want to go out to play? Okay, but you have to recite the poem that Mommy just taught you. If you can recite it well, Daddy will take you out to play." Hearing this, the little fellow was not afraid at all. Instead, she proudly raised her little head and said loudly, "I can recite it." "Okay, then recite it to me." Since he said that, the little fellow did not have stage fright. After jumping off the sofa, she ran to the opposite side of the sofa and faced Qin and Qin Ruoying and recited it loudly. "When I was young I left home, but when I was old I returned home. My hometown accent has not changed. When children meet they don't know each other. Smiling they ask where you are from." Although the recitation was a bit bumpy, and the pronunciation was not very clear, at least she finished reciting Homecoming Book. But after reciting it, this little thing stood in place with her hands behind her back. Her small body swayed left and right, and at the same time she looked at Qin with her big eyes. Looking at her lack of confidence, it was obvious that she was nervous, so she started to wonder if her back was facing him. Seeing this, Qin immediately laughed and applauded. He could not help but praise, "Good, you recited it well. You didn't miss a single word. Nian, you're amazing." Although she did not recite it well, at least she finished reciting it. And, even if she recited it completely wrong, she would not blame her. She was a child, so she had to be more confident. It was not easy to raise a child, but it was very easy to destroy a child. Sometimes, even a simple scolding could affect a child's life. For example, that sentence, "You can't even remember such a simple thing?" A seemingly insignificant scolding from a parent was very likely to leave a shadow in the child, so that they would start to doubt themselves and be more unwilling to learn. The psychology of a child was actually very simple. If they could not learn well after studying hard, it meant that they were very stupid. In that case, why should they study hard? They could not learn well anyway. The denial of a parent would only make the child more suspicious of himself. It had to be said that parents who habitually denied their children and forcibly put pressure on their children were really retarded. Perhaps they might think that their children were like Neza, who needed suffering and encouragement to thrive. Chinshi's encouragement obviously worked, so this little thing suddenly relaxed a lot. Then she opened her arms and threw herself into Chinshi's arms, giggling. "Papa, am I good?" "Good. Very good." After Chinshi's sincere flattery, this little thing was obviously more active. Like a husky taking a walk, she did not even need Chinshi to carry her. She ran downstairs like the wind. "Yin, run slower. Don't fall." Qin Ruoying hurriedly followed, but she had just taken a few steps when she heard the little thing let out a cry of surprise. Qin Ruoying was shocked. After quickly running downstairs, she saw Yin running out of the building like a wisp of smoke. Then, she happily threw herself into the arms of a person. "Hello, sister." The person who came was actually Lin Xian. Qin Ruoying looked at her with some surprise, then quickly stepped forward and asked, "Xian, when did you come? Why didn't you call me first?" "I said I would call you when I arrived, but I didn't expect to see you go out as soon as I arrived. What a coincidence." Lin Xian smiled and explained. But when Qin Ruoying looked at her, there was still a trace of suspicion in her eyes. After all, they were classmates and best friends for many years, so she felt that Lin Xian was a little strange today. Could it be? Chapter 314. Actually, Lin Xian had always known their address, but because the couple had left one after another, she hadn't visited them for many years. Since she was a guest, she couldn't possibly not even let her through the door, right? Therefore, Qin Ruoying repeatedly invited Lin Xian upstairs, but Lin Xian shook her head repeatedly, saying that she was just passing by to see Yin and would leave soon. Passing by? See Yin? Could she be more careful? Qin Ruoying knew that she was looking for an excuse, but because she couldn't persuade her, she could only accompany her outside the building, chatting while waiting for Chenshi to come downstairs. In fact, the moment the little fellow exclaimed, Chenshi had already used his divine sense to detect Lin Xian's arrival. Therefore, after he packed up and closed the door, he greeted Lin Xian with a smile from afar. "Oh, what a rare guest." That natural action and expression made it seem as if he was greeting a neighbor that he had a good relationship with. It seemed particularly casual and enthusiastic. This kind of natural behavior also gave Lin Xian an illusion in her days. The current him and the him last night, were they really the same person? Su Shi once said, "A brave man is not alarmed when faced with a sudden attack, he is not angry when provoked." Even if Mount Tai collapses in front of him, his expression will not change, and his eyes will not blink when the elk rises to the left. This should be the kind of person he was talking about. Lin Xian stared blankly at Chenshi until Qin Ruoying patted her in puzzlement, and she finally came back to her senses. "Xian, it's rare for you to come. Why don't you go to the park with us today and play with Yin while you're at it?" As if to hide her strangeness, Lin Xian quickly nodded and quickly replied, "Okay, let's go. I just drove today. You guys wait for me at the gate. I'll go get the car." After saying that, she handed the little fellow to Qin Ruoying, and quickly ran towards the gate of the district. Looking at her flustered appearance, Qin Ruoying was really confused, so she looked at Chenshi and asked, "What's wrong with her? I feel that she's a little strange today. Maybe I scared her last night? It's my fault. I should have knocked her out when I went last night." The couple looked at each other helplessly and felt that this matter was a bit troublesome. In fact, it wasn't that Chenshi didn't have the means to erase memories, but this kind of magic more or less had some side effects. Lin Xian was a friend, so he naturally could not use these methods on her. However, how could she, an ordinary person, calmly accept all of this? If she hadn't been so agitated last night, how could she have done such a series of abnormal actions today? What a headache! Because of the little fellow's presence, the adults tacitly put this matter aside for the time being. After that, Lin Xian drove Qin Shi's family to the mall to buy a pink children's bicycle, and then took them to a nearby park. Maybe because the park was too down-to-earth, there was no romantic atmosphere at all, which led to many young people not choosing to come to the park when they were dating. Therefore, this park was either full of uncles and aunties drinking tea and playing cards, or parents bringing their children out to play. As for those young couples in love, they didn't see a single pair. The children's bicycle had 2 balance wheels attached to the rear wheel, so Qin Shi didn't need to teach it. The little thing kicked its legs and started to move. Who knew where the little fellow got so much energy today? As soon as it got on the bicycle, it ran away without a trace. Yan Yan. Ride slower. Don't hit anyone. Qin Ruoying shouted a few words from behind, but this carefree husky didn't care so much and ran away without a trace. There were a lot of old people and children in the park, and Qin Ruoying was worried that she couldn't stop the bicycle and hit someone, so she no longer had her usual dignified and calm temperament, and could only trot behind this naughty egg and at the same time, keep shouting for her to ride slower. The naughty daughter ran in front, and the anxious mother chased behind. Such a scene? It actually gave off a warm feeling. Nian Yin is getting more and more lively now. Looking at Qin Ruoying's anxious appearance, Lin Xian couldn't help but sigh with emotion. However, after Qin Shi finished listening to her words, she smiled and said something that didn't make sense. I'm not going to waste my time. Didn't we have a song when we were young that went viral all over the country? And? What song? Lin Xian was stunned for a moment, obviously confused by his sudden question. Only a mother is good in the world. A child with a mother is like a treasure. Into a mother's embrace, where can you find happiness? Perhaps because she was too easily amused when she heard Qin Shi recite these few lines of lyrics, Lin Xian couldn't help but burst out laughing. But then she smiled and shook her head as if sighing with emotion and couldn't help but sigh softly. Yes, a child with a mother is like a treasure. Ying is back. It's great. Yes, it's great. Qin Shi smiled and nodded and then stopped talking. The two silently looked at the mother and daughter who were circling back not far away, and for a moment, it seemed that they didn't want to talk. After a while, Lin Xian seemed to have thought of something and suddenly turned to look at Qin Shi and asked with a smile, "Oh, right? Last night? I wasn't dreaming, right?" Hearing this, Qin Shi didn't want to hide, so he nodded lightly and gave an affirmative answer. "No." "Oh." After hearing Qin Shi's affirmative answer, Lin Xian suddenly fell silent. Qin Shi waited for a while and seeing that she didn't speak, he asked directly, "Last night's incident should have refreshed your understanding of this world, right? How about I give you a simple explanation?" Hearing this, Lin Xian's eyes flashed with a hint of joy. But soon she asked with a worried face, "These things shouldn't be said casually, right? Why not just treat it as a story?" Then Qin Shi gave her a simple explanation of the Wu Lian secret. As for the part that involved immortal cultivators, even if Qin Shi explained it to Lin Xian, she probably wouldn't understand, so he simply omitted this part, and replaced the immortal cultivators with warriors that were easier for Lin Xian to understand. Perhaps because of trust, Lin Xian didn't feel that Qin Shi was telling her a fantasy after hearing this. Instead, she looked thoughtfully at Qin Ruoying, who wasn't far away, and asked, "Then, is Ying also a warrior?" "Yes, I guess so." After hearing Qin Shi's answer, Lin Xian fell silent again. After hesitating for a while, she asked anxiously, "Qin Shi, since these superpowers are obtained through cultivation, can you teach me? You want to learn?" "Yes." Chapter 315. Fight and Kill? After hearing Qin Shi's words, Lin Xian's expression darkened, as if something had touched her heart. Seeing her hesitant look, Qin Shi was a little puzzled. Thus, after pondering for a while, he smiled and explained, "Actually, practicing martial arts is quite easy. If you really want to learn, I can teach you. You can just treat it as if you're practicing Tai Chi." Qin Shi's idea was very simple. He could casually teach Lin Xian some basic Qi refining methods. It could strengthen her body and extend her life. At the same time, it could give her more means of self-defense. This could also prevent her from encountering something similar to last night. After all, to a normal person, it would take a lot of mental fortitude to endure 2 kidnappings. After Qin Shi's suggestion, Lin Xian didn't immediately reply. Instead, she turned her head to look at Ying and Yan Yan, who were playing not far away. Looking at this classmate, friend, and best friend who was already a mother, and then looking at the lively and cute little fellow beside her, Lin Xian suddenly felt an indescribable bitterness in her heart. She always felt that Yingying was like Mr. Chao Shuichin's description in Dream of the Red Chamber. When she's quiet, she's like a beautiful flower shining on the water. When she moves, she's like a weak willow swaying in the wind. The heart has one more orifice than the body, and the sickly Shizi wins by 3 points. Although Yingying usually looked weak, she was definitely not a pretentious woman. She was gentle, low-key, and reserved. If it wasn't for that beautiful face, it would be easy for people to overlook her existence. After so many years in Lin Xian's impression, the only time Yingying showed off her ability was probably when she publicly rejected Zhao Yuan's love and threw herself into Chen Shi's arms. At that moment, not to mention Chen Shi, even she, a woman, was stunned by Yingying's actions. Speaking of which, it was laughable. It was also from that moment onwards that she truly began to notice Chen Shi, this piece of gold that had yet to shine. Lin Xian stood there in a daze as memories of the past flooded his mind. For a moment he actually stood there in a daze. Chen Shi thought that she was thinking, so after a while he asked with a smile, "What do you think? Would you like to learn?" Chen Shi's voice pulled Lin Xian back from his chaotic thoughts. She glanced at Chen Shi with a slightly panicked expression before replying, "When are you going back to Shangjing?" "Soon, probably within the next few days. Nian is going to kindergarten. It's time to bring her back to get used to it." "Oh." Lin Xian went silent again. She buried her head and didn't speak for a long time. Because she was half a head shorter than Chen Shi, if Chen Shi didn't use his divine sense, he naturally wouldn't be able to see the expression on her face. Lin Xian was indeed a bit strange today. Chen Shi looked at her in confusion. He wondered if what happened last night had triggered her, so he began to think about how to help her get rid of this shadow. But just as Chen Shi was puzzled, Lin Xian suddenly said this earth-shattering sentence, "Chen Shi, I like you." Her voice was very soft, almost inaudible. But how sensitive was Chen Shi's ears? So after hearing her words, Chen Shi couldn't help but frown. What shouldn't have come finally came. Chen Shi took a step back without leaving a trace. After putting some distance between Lin Xian and himself, he began to think about how to answer her. At this time Lin Xian suddenly started to cry. Like a frightened ostrich, she buried her head even deeper. As the strong sense of guilt gushed out from the bottom of her heart, she could no longer hold back her tears and they slid down her cheeks. I'm sorry. I like you, just like how the wind flies for 8,000 miles without asking when it will return. Was it wrong to like someone? It was wrong. It was a big mistake. Because she liked a married man, and this man was also her best friend's husband. Mistake upon mistake. But, was this really her fault? Actually, the trajectory of fate had changed the moment Chen Shi came back. If it wasn't for the accidental encounter that day, perhaps she would have accepted Li Xiuwen's pursuit. After all, how could she not be curious about a man who could make such an outstanding woman like Yingying fall in love with him? It was this damned curiosity that made her sink deeper and deeper. There was nothing wrong with liking someone. Liking someone you shouldn't be liking, that was wrong. Lin Xian was very clear about this, so she had always carefully kept her heart in the corner, hoping that one day when she took it out again, there would be no trace of that person left behind. When you like someone but you have to bear the pain and bitterness by yourself, she had already made a big mistake. In fact, it was not difficult to realize that one was wrong. It was just that this mistake was harder to correct than one would expect. From the encounter in the shop window to the fire in the unfinished building, from the short time they spent together at the wedding, to the despair and helplessness she felt when she was lying on the altar. Just when she was most afraid, Chen Shi broke through the door. At that moment, just like how she opened the curtains in the morning, the bright and beautiful sunlight shone directly into the darkest corner of her heart. The originally blurry figure gradually became clearer in Lin Xian's heart. This also made her unable to see anything else. Everything in the world was overshadowed. In her eyes, there was only the figure that she yearned for day and night. Finally, Lin Xian couldn't control herself anymore. At this moment, she spilled out her heart that had been hidden for a long time. I'm sorry, I like you. However, just as the big cat was about to pounce on the little guy, a big hand suddenly grabbed it in midair. Meow. The big cat looked at Qin with a dumbfounded expression. But before it could recover, Qin slapped it on the head. Look at you, how fat are you? Can a 5-year-old child like her catch you? While speaking, Qin also weighed the big cat's weight. It must be more than 10 kilograms, right? It had only been a few months and this guy was about to grow into a Garfield cat. Become smaller, how can she carry you when you're so fat? Qin pinched the big cat with a look of disgust. But after the big cat heard this, it could only respond with an innocent face, meow. This guy's cultivation had advanced by leaps and bounds, so its body was getting bigger and bigger. Although it could change its size, there was a limit to this transformation. It could not become smaller than a mouse, right? Therefore its current size was already the smallest it could ever be. Qin understood what the big cat meant. But when he looked down and saw Yan's hopeful little eyes, he immediately said to the big cat in an unquestionable tone, "You can't become smaller, right? I'll help you." Thinking of this, Bai Hong couldn't help but take a deep look at Qin before asking her second question. "Who are you?" His question was very general, so Qin immediately replied with a smile. "Me? My name is Qin. I'm from Zhonghai and I'm currently living in Shangjing. I'm unemployed and I own a tea house. I spend most of my time at home with my wife and kids." Bai Hong wasn't a fool. This perfunctory answer naturally wouldn't satisfy him. Therefore, he immediately interrupted Qin and said angrily, "Don't try to trick me. With the cultivation conditions of the lower realms, it's impossible for an existence of your level to appear. Who are you? Why do you want to be our enemy?" Bai Hong seemed to be very concerned about this question. Seeing this, Qin spread out his hands innocently and replied seriously, "Why would I lie to you? I'm really a native of Earth. Yes, Earth is the lower realm you mentioned. I've always been in the lower realm, so I don't know anything about your world. Otherwise, why would I waste my time asking you these simple questions?" These words were reasonable and for a moment, Bai Hong didn't know how to continue asking. Yes, if Qin also came from the lower realm, then why didn't he know the history that everyone knew? Bai Hong secretly tried to figure out Qin background. Qin waited for a while. Seeing that Bai Hong didn't speak, he asked with a smile, "Okay, now it's my turn to ask questions?" Bai Hong didn't answer. Seeing this, Qin continued asking, "Let's talk about the lower realm. I'm very curious about the situation inside." As he spoke, he gently rubbed the soul crystal in his hand with his finger. This action seemed to be a silent warning to Bai Hong that if he still didn't speak, he would use force. In fact, the reason why Qin took the trouble to ask and didn't directly use the secret technique to search his soul was mainly because his soul injury had not healed. After all, Bai Hong and the others were not weak and their souls were intact. If they also happened to practice some kind of secret technique that strengthened their souls, then Qin would very likely suffer a backlash in the process of casting the technique and go crazy. Qin now had the upper hand and had plenty of ways to make Bai Hong talk. Naturally, he wouldn't take the risk so easily. It was better to be safe than sorry. Qin had a deep understanding of this. Looking at the glimmering light on the soul crystal, an indescribable feeling suddenly appeared in Bai Hong's eyes. After exhaling deeply, he looked at Qin and slowly said, "The lower realm? That's a place that's close to paradise." The lower realm was located in a void crack in the depths of the universe and was connected to Earth through the gate of heaven. Therefore, even if Earth's spirit chi was exhausted, the lower realm still had rich spirit chi of heaven and Earth. It was precisely because of this that cultivators had always established relationships with each other in the form of clans and sects, and could only huddle together in a small area for warmth. In the end, it was all because of those simple 8 words: natural selection, survival of the fittest. she would see more, learn more, and do more. Although she was only a waitress in the tea house, when she held the keys to the tea house, a fighting spirit ignited in her heart for no reason. The peaceful and indifferent life kept repeating itself. Time flew by, and in the blink of an eye, it was summer. This morning, while the little girl was feeding the fish, she quietly came to her side, and then asked mysteriously, "Nyan, come, Daddy wants to ask you a question. Do you know what day it is tomorrow?" Hearing this, the little girl tilted her head and thought for a while. But after thinking for a long time, she still couldn't think of a reason, so she shook her head blankly. "Think again?" She asked again. But the little girl shook her head again. She had no choice but to cough lightly and remind her, "Today is May 5th. Hearing this, the little girl still didn't seem to react, and the expression on her face looked very cute. She was silent. Then he suddenly raised both hands like a child and shouted very exaggeratedly, "Today is your birthday. Are you happy?" "Birthday?" The little girl was obviously stunned, but then, as if nothing had happened, she turned around and continued to throw minced meat into the fish tank. Big Head opened its bloody mouth. Every time it swallowed a piece of minced meat, it happily turned around in the water. And the big cat was lying on the side, and from time to time, it would poke its head out to snatch a piece of meat to eat. This behavior made Big Head so angry that it kept bubbling in its mouth. This scene made Chinchi stunned. Strange. Nyan's reaction was not right, but after thinking about it, Chinchi understood what was going on with the little girl. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.